The Summoning by Arthur F. Iceley, a blockbuster science fiction adventure set in the far reaches of space, where humanity stands at the crossroads between transcendence and extinction. The story follows Commander Jace Krane and Dr. Myra Shen as they fight to save billions of minds from an ancient siren call that threatens to consume entire star systems. With stunning cosmic battles and a race against time, The Summoning weaves a tapestry of intrigue, courage, and the delicate balance between technology and the unknown. Narration by Arthur F. Iceley brings this epic tale to life with gripping intensity and emotional depth. Chapter 1, The Bridge of the FNS Relentless hummed with a symphony of machinery, a relentless heartbeat pulsing through the recycled air. The scent of ozone and aged metal clung to every surface, a familiar perfume to those who called the cruiser home. Commander Jace Krane stood at the center of it all, his tall frame silhouetted against the cold expanse of stars sprawled across the viewscreen. His steel-gray eyes reflected the distant pinpricks of light, but his gaze was hollow, untouched by the spectacle unfolding before him. The anniversary celebration flickered to life on the screen, a grand parade of ships, their hulls gleaming under artificial suns, weaving intricate patterns against a backdrop of nebulae. The Federation's anthem echoed through the bridge speakers, swelling with triumph and hope. Jace's expression remained unchanged, his scarred left cheek unmoved by the spectacle. "Quite the show, isn't it, sir?" Lieutenant Kael Vorn's voice cut through the pomp, his tone bright despite the seriousness of his duty station at the helm. He swiveled his chair to face Jace, green eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "The Higgs jump 200 years and we're still reaching for more." Jace grunted, his gaze never leaving the viewscreen. His fingers tapped a staccato rhythm on the console beside him, a nervous tick he couldn't shake. 2 centuries of pushing boundaries," he said, voice low and gruff. "And what have we found? More emptiness." Kael chuckled, unfazed by Jace's cynicism. He leaned back in his chair, hands clasped behind his head. "Come on, sir. We've got colonies thriving across a dozen sectors, technology advancing faster than ever, not to mention the allies we've made." "You mean the factions we've coerced into treaties?" Jace interrupted, finally turning to Kael. His eyes held a weary challenge. Kael grinned wider, undeterred. "Semantics!" Jace snorted and looked back at the viewscreen. The parade of ships had given way to holographic fireworks exploding in silence across the void. He could almost feel the vibration of the Higgs drive beneath his boots, a constant reminder of humanity's relentless expansion. But with each new frontier came new dangers, new losses. He thought of the faces etched into his memory, crew members who'd never seen their next shore leave, whose names were now etched on the memorial wall in the ship's chapel. The Federation's celebrations felt like a mockery when set against that silent testament. Yet he understood Kael's optimism. It was the same fire that had once burned within him. The hum of the bridge changed pitch as an alert chimed through the comm system. Jace's head snapped up, eyes narrowing as he scanned the incoming transmission. His fingers darted over the console, pulling up the message with practiced efficiency. A priority alert flashed across his screen, the stark red letters jarring against the usual greens and blues of Federation communications. His heart pounded once hard before settling into a steady rhythm. The cold detachment fell away, replaced by a razor-sharp focus. He read the words silently, his grip tightening on the console edge. 3 remote colonies gone dark in the past month. No distress calls, no wreckage, just silence. He felt Kael's gaze but didn't acknowledge it. Instead, he barked orders, voice cutting through the bridge like a blade. "Vorn, get us off this broadcast channel. I want full sensor sweep and communications scan of the affected sectors. Priority to any anomalies or unregistered signals." Kael sprang into action, his fingers dancing over the controls with precision. The bridge crew snapped to attention, their earlier levity replaced by grim determination. Jace turned back to the viewscreen, his reflection staring at him from the cold expanse of stars. He keyed in a command, and the celebration display vanished, replaced by a star chart highlighting the 3 colonies: Elysium Delta, Orion's Veil, and Nova Prime. His mind raced, piecing together scenarios and possibilities. No distress calls meant no time for evasive action or last-minute pleas. Complete silence suggested either catastrophic failure or something far more sinister. He tapped into the ship's database, pulling up reports on each colony. Elysium Delta, a mining outpost known for its volatile terrain. Orion's Veil, a scientific research station studying cosmic phenomena. Nova Prime, an agricultural colony nestled in the heart of a lush exoplanet. Diverse missions, diverse threats. Behind him, Kael's voice cut through his thoughts. Sir, sensors are clear across all 3 sectors. No immediate signs of hostilities or natural disasters. Jace nodded, absorbing the information without comment. He leaned forward, fingers tracing the outlines of the colonies on the screen. The hum of the Higgs drive seemed louder now, a relentless pulse echoing his own heartbeat. "What do you think happened?" Kael asked softly, stepping closer to the view screen. Jace's gaze flicked to Kael briefly before returning to the star chart. "Don't know yet," he said, voice gruff, "but we'll find out." He straightened, taking a deep breath of the recycled air that tasted faintly metallic. The cold efficiency of command settled over him like a second skin. He keyed in another command, pulling up the patrol orders for the vanishing colonies. The screen flickered to life with detailed coordinates and mission parameters. His eyes scanned the information rapidly, committing it to memory before speaking aloud. "New course set for Elysium Delta," he ordered, voice steady and authoritative. "Maximum sublight until we reach the outer rim of the sector. Vorn, I want continuous scans and updates on any changes in the local stellar field." Kael nodded, already inputting the new course into the navigation system. The bridge crew moved with synchronized precision, their movements a ballet of discipline and training. Jace's gaze drifted back to the view screen as the stars outside began to shift, the cruiser's trajectory altering subtly but decisively. He felt the familiar tug of responsibility, protector, investigator, commander. Each role weighed heavy on his shoulders, but he bore them without complaint. He thought of the colonists, families torn apart by silence, lives hanging in the balance. The Federation's celebrations seemed distant now, a world away from this new reality. Yet amidst the cold void and looming uncertainty, there was one constant: duty. And Jace Krane would see it through, no matter the cost. As the FNS Relentless cut through the darkness, leaving the glow of celebratory fireworks behind, Jace stood tall on the bridge. His reflection in the view screen showed a man hardened by experience but unbroken. The scar on his cheek was more than just a memento. It was a badge of survival, a testament to battles fought and won. He turned back to Kael, who watched him with steady resolve. "Let's find out what happened," Jace said, voice firm. "And bring them home?" Kael nodded, determination etched on his features. The bridge crew echoed the sentiment, their voices blending into a single, resolute chorus. Together, they plunged deeper into the unknown, guided by the relentless hum of the Higgs drive and the unyielding spirit of those who dared to explore the stars. The cold expanse of space stretched out before them, a canvas of endless possibilities and hidden dangers. But for Jace Krane and his crew, it was more than just a void. It was home, a frontier waiting to be claimed, one silent colony at a time. Chapter 2, Whispers in the Void. The FNS Relentless eased into its docking berth at Sigma Station like a predator stalking its prey, silent and deliberate. Commander Jace Krane stood on the bridge, his reflection staring back at him from the reinforced glass viewport. The station loomed ahead, a sprawling metallic spider against the velvet blackness of space, its lights still burning brightly despite the eerie silence that encompassed it. Lieutenant Kael Vorn, standing beside him, swallowed hard, his knuckles white as he gripped the railing. "Sir, are you sure about this? The last report said all communications ceased abruptly." His voice echoed in the quiet bridge, betraying a nervous edge. Jace nodded grimly. "We've dealt with worse, Kael. This is just another ghost town." He turned away from the viewport and barked orders to the crew. "Seal the airlocks until we're sure it's safe. Full environmental scan." The docking clamps engaged with a series of metallic thuds that resonated through the deck plates. Jace led the away team himself. Kael closed behind him along with 4 heavily armed Marines. The airlock cycled open with an ominous hiss, revealing the sterile corridor of Sigma Station. The first thing that hit them was the silence, a thick, oppressive weight that seemed to muffle their footsteps and breathe down their necks. The station's recycled air hung stale and unmoving, carrying a faint tang of ozone and something else, an almost imperceptible sweetness that made Jace's nostrils twitch. Jace's boots thudded softly on the metal grating as they moved through the corridors. The walls bore no signs of struggle, no scorch marks or bullet holes. It was too clean, too orderly. They passed open doors leading to living quarters, beds neatly made, personal belongings untouched. In the cafeteria, trays still sat on tables, meals half-eaten, steaming cups of coffee going cold. Kael paused at one table, staring at a plate with a fork stuck into a half-peeled apple. "They just left," his voice cracked slightly. Jace's gaze flicked to the lieutenant before hardening. He didn't need Kael faltering now. "Stay sharp," he ordered, moving deeper into the station. They reached the command center, and Jace stepped inside, his eyes scanning the banks of consoles and hollow screens. Everything was powered down but intact. A faint hum from the ventilation system was the only sound breaking the silence. He touched a console, waking it up. Static flickered across the screen before stabilizing into a diagnostic report. Jace's brow furrowed as he read through the data. "Nothing out of the ordinary here," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "All systems nominal." Kael joined him at the console, his breath hitching slightly. "Commander," a sudden rustle behind them made both men spin around, hands flying to their sidearms. A figure stood in the doorway, tall and slender, clad in a lab coat over a flight suit. Dark skin contrasted sharply with bright amber eyes that seemed to absorb every detail of the room. "Dr. Myra Shen," she introduced herself calmly, extending a hand towards Jace. "Xenolinguist specialist, assigned by Federation High Command." Jace hesitated for a moment before shaking her hand firmly. "Commander Jace Krane," he gestured to Kael. "Lieutenant Vorn." Myra's gaze flicked between them, taking in their reactions with clinical detachment. "I trust you found the station. Unsettling." Her voice was smooth, almost melodic, yet carried an underlying edge of intensity. Jace nodded curtly. "We haven't found any bodies or signs of forced entry." Myra stepped further into the room, her braids swinging gently behind her as she moved with deliberate purpose towards a different console. She activated it swiftly and began sifting through data streams, her fingers dancing over the controls with practiced ease. "Your scans won't find anything," she said without looking back at them. "This isn't about physical violence or sabotage." Kael glanced at Jace, confusion etched on his face. Jace remained stoic but felt a twinge of unease. He trusted Myra's expertise. High Command wouldn't have assigned her lightly. Myra paused suddenly, her fingers hovering over the controls. She leaned in closer to the screen, amber eyes scanning lines of data intently. "Here," she murmured, tapping a sequence of commands. "Look at this." A hollow screen flickered to life above the console, displaying a complex waveform, subtle pulses undulating through static. Jace frowned, stepping closer. "What am I looking at?" he asked. "Subsonic carrier wave," Myra explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "Buried deep within the station's communication logs, something was broadcasting from here." Jace's frown deepened. "Broadcasting what?" Myra shook her head slowly. "That's the problem. It shouldn't exist. The frequency, the modulation. It doesn't match any known human technology or language patterns." Kael looked at the waveform, his confusion growing. "How do you even know it's there?" Myra glanced up at him briefly before returning to the hollow screen. "Years of studying alien communications and linguistics. Patterns emerge where others see noise." Jace watched her work, impressed despite himself. She moved with a focus that bordered on obsession, each gesture precise and deliberate. He felt an odd sense of relief. If anyone could unravel this mystery, it was likely this woman. Myra isolated the waveform, enhancing its clarity until the pulses seemed almost tangible. Her fingers danced over virtual keys, running algorithms designed to decipher alien languages. The room fell silent except for the soft hum of machinery and Myra's steady breathing. Hours passed as they worked in tense silence. Kael paced restlessly, his nerves fraying at the edges. Jace stood rigidly beside Myra, watching her decode layers upon layers of data until finally, something shifted on the screen. Myra's breath hitched slightly, and she leaned back, staring at the spectral analysis with wide eyes. The pulses had resolved into a series of symbols, complex geometric shapes that seemed to dance and shift before settling into coherent patterns. "What is it?" Jace asked quietly, feeling an unfamiliar tightening in his chest. Myra didn't respond immediately. She reached out tentatively, tracing one of the symbols with her fingertip as if expecting it to burn. Her amber eyes caught the faint glow from the hollow screen, reflecting back an almost otherworldly light. Then she went pale, her hand dropping away from the screen. "It's a language," she whispered, "but not like any we've encountered before." Jace stepped closer, his voice low and urgent. "What does it say?" Myra looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "I haven't decoded enough to translate it fully, but—" She hesitated, swallowing hard. "But what?" Kael prompted, stepping forward. Myra's gaze flicked between them, settling on Jace. "It's a summoning," she said softly, "or at least that's the impression I get, a call directed outward." Jace felt a cold shiver run down his spine, summoning. The implications were chilling. He thought of the empty corridors, the untouched meals, and suddenly the silence took on a new, more sinister quality. "What does it mean?" Kael asked, his voice barely audible. Myra shook her head slowly. "I don't know yet, but whatever sent this signal, it wanted something to come here." Jace stared at the spectral data, the symbols now seeming to pulse with an almost malevolent energy. He turned to Myra, his expression grave. "We need to find out what that something is and how to stop it," he said firmly. Myra nodded, her resolve hardening. She took a deep breath and returned to the console, her fingers resuming their dance over the controls as she delved deeper into the enigmatic language. The command center filled with tension, a palpable weight that pressed down on them all. Jace felt it too, the gnawing unease of standing on the precipice of something vast and unknown. But he also felt a spark of determination. They had come this far and they would see it through. As Myra worked, her amber eyes reflected the eerie glow of the hollow screen, casting long shadows across her face. She was lost in thought, her mind racing through possibilities and patterns. Whatever she uncovered next would change everything. Of that much, Jace was certain. And so, amidst the silence and stillness of Sigma Station, they stood on the edge of discovery, ready to plunge into the abyss if it meant unraveling the mystery that had consumed 2,000 lives. Chapter 3. The whisper in the static, the analysis lab hummed with a symphony of low-frequency vibrations, the air thick with the scent of ozone and the faint tang of old metal. Dr. Myra Shen sat ensconced in a nest of cables and holographic interfaces, her fingers dancing over the translucent pads that floated in midair like specters. The dim glow of screens cast eerie shadows on her face, accentuating the sharp lines of her cheeks and the intense focus in her amber eyes. She had isolated the subsonic signal hours ago, but it was only now, in the quietude of the late cycle, that she allowed herself to truly listen. The lab's isolation chamber, a small room lined with acoustic dampeners, awaited her. She stepped inside, sealing the door behind her with a soft hiss. The chamber swallowed her in darkness, save for the faint blue glow emanating from a single console before her. Myra activated the playback sequence, and the room filled with an almost imperceptible hum, a sound that seemed to vibrate at the very edges of her consciousness rather than her eardrums. It was like standing near the deepest part of the ocean, where the waves themselves are barely perceptible, but their power is undeniable. The signal unfolded in a cascade of mathematical sequences, each one resolving into syllables that held no meaning in any known human language. Yet as she listened, her mind began to translate these alien sounds into words she understood intrinsically. An invitation, a summons, a promise. It was as if the language itself was woven into the fabric of her thoughts, resonating with some primordial part of her being. Her breath hitched as the first coherent phrase formed in her mind. "We have waited." The voice was not harsh or commanding, but soft and insistent, like a lover's whisper in the darkness. It carried an emotion that transcended words, a longing so profound it bordered on anguish. Myra felt a warmth at the edge of her thoughts, a gentle presence that seemed to stand just behind her in the darkened chamber. It was not threatening, but rather comforting, a familiar stranger beckoning her closer. Her skin prickled with goosebumps as she closed her eyes, letting the signal wash over her. The sensation grew more intense, the words flowing like a river through her mind. "Come to us, join us in the endless night." The presence pressed against her awareness, a tangible force that made her heart race and her breath quicken. It was seductive, inviting her to surrender, to let go of all earthly concerns and embrace the void. Fear and wonder battled within her. Terror clawed at her chest as she felt herself teetering on the brink of some cosmic abyss. Yet there was also a thrill, a sense of standing on the precipice of discovery, of being part of something vast and ancient beyond comprehension. Myra's hands trembled slightly as she reached out to adjust the playback controls, trying to regain some semblance of control over her environment. But the signal had already burrowed deep, its tendrils wrapping around her consciousness like vines. Suddenly, the door to the isolation chamber hissed open, and a beam of harsh white light sliced through the darkness. Commander Jace Krane stepped inside, his silhouette imposing against the glow from the lab outside. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the room, settling on Myra's figure bathed in the ethereal blue light. "Myra," his voice was a low rumble, tinged with concern and a hint of suspicion. She turned to him, her vision still swimming with the afterimage of the signal's presence. Her amber eyes seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, casting an eerie reflection onto his face. He took a step closer, his brow furrowing as he studied her. "You've been in here for hours," Jace said, his voice steady but his gaze probing. "What did you find?" Myra opened her mouth to speak, but words failed her. The presence lingered at the edge of her thoughts, its warm embrace still resonating within her. She took a deep breath, trying to shake off the lingering effects. "It's ... it's an invitation," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "An ancient entity is calling us." Jace's expression darkened, his protective instincts kicking in. He moved closer, standing just outside the reach of the console's glow. "An invitation. From what?" Myra hesitated, trying to articulate the inexplicable. "It's not just data, Jace, it's a presence, a voice that speaks directly to my mind." She shook her head, frustration and awe mingling in her expression. Jace's eyes flicked to the console, then back to Myra. His jaw tightened as he processed what she was saying. "Alien propaganda," he muttered. "You've been exposed too long." "No," Myra insisted, her voice gaining strength. "It's more than that. It feels personal." She paused, searching for the right words. "Like someone standing just behind me in a dark room." Jace's gaze softened slightly, concern replacing some of his initial skepticism. He reached out and gently cupped her shoulder, his touch grounding. "Myra, you've been working nonstop. This could be a hallucination brought on by exhaustion." She shook her head vigorously. "No, Jace, I heard it clearly. It understands me." He regarded her for a moment longer before nodding curtly. "All right, let's get you out of here. You need rest." Myra allowed him to guide her out of the isolation chamber, her steps unsteady but willing. As they stepped back into the lab, she felt the signal's presence waning, like a distant echo fading into silence. Jace led her to a chair and made sure she was seated comfortably before turning his attention back to the consoles. He scanned the readouts, his expression inscrutable. "I'll run some diagnostics on this signal," he said after a moment. "See if it triggers any anomalies." Myra nodded, grateful for his support, but also aware of the undercurrent of tension between them. She watched as he worked, his fingers moving deftly over the controls. The lab's usual hum seemed louder now, almost intrusive in comparison to the profound silence of the signal. After a few minutes, Jace straightened and turned to her. "Kael's reported that other Federation ships are picking up the same signal. Something vast is out there." Myra felt a chill run down her spine at the confirmation. "What do we do?" Jace's gaze met hers, steady and resolute. "We need more data and you need rest." He paused, then added, "I'll be here monitoring it all night if necessary. You should get some sleep." Myra nodded, though the thought of leaving the lab filled her with a strange sense of loss, of disconnecting from that warm presence. But she knew Jace was right. She needed clarity. As she stood up and made her way to the door, Myra glanced back at Jace, his silhouette framed against the console's glow. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, acknowledging her gratitude with a small smile. Then he returned his focus to the consoles, his expression once again serious and intent. Myra left the lab, the hum of the ship surrounding her like a protective shroud. The corridors were dimly lit at this hour, casting long shadows that seemed to mirror the darkness within her mind. She made her way to her quarters, the signal's echo still lingering faintly in her thoughts. Back in the lab, Jace continued his analysis, his eyes scanning lines of code and mathematical sequences. He couldn't shake off Myra's description, the presence she claimed to have felt. It went against every rational fiber within him, but he couldn't deny the change in her demeanor, her amber eyes glowing like embers. Hours passed before Kael Vorn entered the lab, his uniform crisp despite the late hour. "Commander," he greeted, stepping beside Jace at the consoles. "Any updates?" Jace nodded, motioning to the screens filled with data. "The signal's persistent and complex, but Myra, she seems affected by it." Kael raised an eyebrow. "Affected how?" "She says she understands it, feels a presence." Jace's voice was low, almost reluctant. Kael listened intently before nodding thoughtfully. "If other ships are picking it up too, we need to coordinate with Fleet Command." Jace agreed, his fingers tapping out commands on the console. "We'll need to brief them, but first..." He turned back to one of the larger screens and activated a playback sequence. The lab filled with the same subsonic hum Myra had encountered earlier. It was barely audible, yet profoundly unsettling, a language that shouldn't be understood but resonated deeply within their minds. The two men stood in silence, listening as the ancient words unfolded, an invitation echoing through the void of space, a summons from something vast and patient beyond human comprehension. As the signal played aloud on the bridge, its presence pulsed like a heartbeat, a rhythmic call that seemed to stir something primal within them both. Kael's gaze flickered to Jace, seeing his own unease mirrored in the commander's expression. The Ian's signal filled their thoughts with whispers of wonder and terror, an enigmatic beacon from the dark between stars, inviting humanity into its cosmic embrace. Chapter 4. The Ian's siren call, the bridge of the USS Relentless hummed with an unusual quiet tension as the crew gathered around the central console. Dr. Myra Shen stood at the forefront, her fingers dancing over the holographic interface, preparing to play the decoded message from the enigmatic signal they had intercepted. Commander Jace Krane leaned against the captain's chair, his arms crossed, eyes fixed on the swirling data streams that danced above Myra's hands. Lieutenant Kael Vorn stood at attention by the tactical station, his gaze flicking between Myra and Jace, a silent sentinel in the growing storm. Myra took a deep breath and pressed her hand against the console. The bridge lights dimmed slightly as the speakers came to life. A voice filled the room, a voice that was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It resonated with an almost hypnotic quality, smooth and measured, like the whisper of cosmic winds through ancient nebulae. "Greetings, children of carbon and stardust," it began, the words flowing with a melody that seemed to vibrate in the very bones of those who listened. "We are the Ian, the eternal weavers of the galactic tapestry. For eons, we have watched you grow, evolve, and strive against the darkness of your universe. Your journey has been one of trial and tribulation, but it has shaped you into beings of remarkable potential." Jace's brow furrowed as he listened, his grip tightening on the chair's armrest. The voice continued, its tone shifting to a soothing cadence that seemed to weave through their minds like a gentle current. "Your physical forms have served you well, but they are also your shackles. We offer you liberation, to transcend the limitations of flesh and blood, to join us in the vast expanse of the collective consciousness. Imagine a realm where suffering is but a distant memory, where knowledge flows freely through interconnected minds, and where peace reigns eternal." Myra's eyes widened as she listened, her scientific curiosity battling with an underlying unease. The voice painted a picture so enticing that it was almost impossible to resist its allure. Beside her, Kael shifted slightly, his expression inscrutable but his stance rigid, as if bracing against the emotional tug of the message. "We have observed your advancements and your struggles," the Ian continued. "Your wars, your triumphs, your endless quest for meaning, all are part of a grand design that has brought you to this moment. Now we extend our hand in invitation. Come forth, children of the stars, and let us elevate you to heights beyond your wildest dreams." The bridge fell into a profound silence as the message concluded. The weight of its words hung heavy in the air like the calm before a storm. Jace straightened, his gaze locking onto Myra's. "Well," he prompted, his voice steady despite the turmoil within him. Myra hesitated, her fingers still hovering over the console. The scientific implications are staggering, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. If this is true, if they can offer us transcendence, it could change everything. Jace's expression darkened. Or it could be the biggest trap this side of the galaxy. Before Myra could respond, the viewscreen flickered to life, revealing Admiral Rorik Voss. His tall, imposing figure filled the screen, his silver hair combed neatly back, and his cold blue eyes piercing through the holographic interface. The metals on his uniform gleamed under the artificial light, a stark contrast to the chill in his voice. "Commander Krane," he began, his gaze fixed on Jace like a predator's. "I trust you have heard the message from our guests." Jace nodded, his jaw set. "We have, Admiral." Voss's lips curled into a thin smile, one that held no warmth. "Excellent. I've been moved by this discovery in ways I won't bother to share with your crew. Suffice it to say, the Federation has taken an interest. Your orders are clear. Proceed to the coordinates embedded in the signal and make first contact." A ripple of unease passed through the bridge. Myra's eyes darted between Jace and Voss, her mind racing. Jace's fingers tapped a staccato rhythm on the chair armrest, his expression unreadable. "You want us to walk right into this?" Jace challenged, his voice low but firm. "With all due respect, Admiral, that sounds like a recipe for disaster." Voss's smile faded, replaced by a stern glare. "Disaster is a relative term, Commander. The Aeon have offered humanity a chance at transcendence, a gift beyond measure. We cannot afford to squander it based on your gut feelings." Jace leaned forward, his eyes never leaving Voss's. "And what if my gut feeling is right? What if this is a trap?" The Admiral's gaze hardened. "Then you will handle it, Commander. That is why you are there, and why the Relentless is one of our most advanced ships. Failure is not an option." Jace's grip on the chair tightened until his knuckles turned white. He glanced at Myra, who met his gaze with a mixture of fear and resolve. The door to their relationship, one built on shared experiences and mutual respect, was cracked open by this moment, revealing the depth of their connection in the face of adversity. "Understood, Admiral," Jace said finally, his voice steady despite the turmoil within him. "We will proceed to the coordinates." Voss nodded, a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. "See that you do, Commander. The Federation is counting on you." With that, the viewscreen went dark, leaving the bridge crew in stunned silence. Jace pushed away from the chair and approached Myra, his voice low so only she could hear him. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his eyes searching hers for any hint of doubt. Myra looked up at him, her expression a blend of apprehension and determination. "I can't deny the possibilities it holds," she admitted softly. "But I trust your instincts, Jace, if you think this is dangerous." "You're the scientist here," he interrupted gently. "You tell me what we should do." Myra took a deep breath, her fingers tracing patterns on the console as if seeking comfort in familiarity. "As much as I want to explore this, I have to agree with you, something doesn't feel right." Jace nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Good," he said, "because we're going to need all our wits about us." He turned to Kael, who had been listening intently throughout the exchange. "Lieutenant Vorn set a course for the coordinates. Max alert status, red alert protocols in case things go south." Kael nodded sharply and moved to his station. His fingers flew over the controls as he plotted their new trajectory. Myra watched Jace with admiration mixed with concern. He was a natural leader, a quality she had always appreciated about him, even if it sometimes put them at odds. As they prepared to venture into the unknown, she couldn't help but wonder what awaited them beyond those coordinates, and whether they would return unchanged from the encounter. The Relentless shuddered slightly as its engines roared to life, propelling them through the vast expanse of space toward their destiny. Jace took his place at the helm, his hands steady on the controls despite the whirlwind within him. He knew in his gut this was a mistake. Every fiber of his being screamed danger. But he also knew there was no turning back now. As they hurtled through the cosmos, the stars streaking past like tears against a velvet canvas, Jace couldn't shake the feeling that they were sailing into a storm from which there might be no return. Yet amidst the uncertainty and fear, there was a spark of determination, something he'd seen reflected in Myra's eyes moments ago. Together, they would face whatever lay ahead, and hope that their combined strength was enough to weather the tempest of the Aeon's siren call. Chapter 5. Shatter the Relentless cut through the void like a knife, its humdrum rhythm unbroken by the endless expanse of stars ahead. Then, abruptly, the ship's comm system screeched alive with static, piercing the bridge like an ice pick to the eardrums. Commander Jace Krane jerked upright in his chair, eyes snapping to the comm officer. "What the—" he started, but the words were swallowed by a whisper that surged through every speaker, every screen. It wasn't loud, but it was everywhere, a soft susurrus that seemed to creep into the very marrow of their bones. The Aeon calls, it breathed, and the bridge plunged into chaos. Lieutenant Kael Vorn gripped his console, knuckles white, as he stared at the display, which flickered with static. "Commander," he called out, voice tight, "I can't, it's overriding everything." Jace nodded sharply, trying to keep his own unease in check. He could feel it too, a pull, a whisper echoing in the chambers of his mind. "Come home," it murmured, showing him fleeting glimpses of faces long lost. He shook his head violently, banishing the images. "Cut the comms," he ordered, voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "Shut down all external feeds." But it was too late. The whisper had already found its way into their minds, slipping through cracks in their psyches they didn't know existed. Around him, officers stared blankly at screens, some with tears streaming down their faces, others with eyes wide and wild. Ensign Lyra Patel, usually the picture of calm efficiency, was frozen at her station, hands hovering over controls. Her lips moved silently, forming words Jace couldn't hear but could feel. "Yes," she seemed to say, "I'm coming." He lurched out of his seat, crossing the bridge in 3 long strides. He grabbed her shoulders, giving her a sharp shake. "Lyra," he barked, her eyes focused on him, glassy but aware. She blinked rapidly, as if waking from a trance. "Commander," she whispered. "Snap out of it," he ordered, voice low but fierce. "You're needed here." She nodded jerkily, taking a deep breath before turning back to her console. Jace watched her for a moment longer, ensuring she was stable before moving on. Dr. Myra Shen burst onto the bridge from her lab, hair disheveled and eyes wide with alarm. She skidded to a halt, looking around wildly. "What's happening?" she demanded. Jace met her gaze, seeing his own struggle reflected in hers. "She's fighting it too," he realized, relief mingling with dread. "The Aeon," he said simply. "It broadcast something." But Myra was already pulling up data on a nearby console, fingers flying over the keys. She cursed under her breath, then looked up at him, expression grave. "Jace, this is bad. It's not just a message. It's an influence, a compulsion." Before he could respond, another officer, a young ensign named Tam, screamed. Jace spun to see the ensign standing, hands clenched at his sides, face contorted in agony. "Make it stop," Tam cried out, voice raw with pain. It hurts so much." Jace rushed to him, but Tam shrank back, eyes filled with terror. Then he turned and ran, sprinting off the bridge towards the nearest airlock. "Tam, no!" Jace shouted, heart pounding, but it was too late. The ensign slammed through the doors, leaving them open in his wake. Jace stared at the empty corridor, horror gripping him. He didn't need to see what came next, he knew. On a nearby screen, an alert flashed, airlock breach, deck 7. He turned away, nausea churning in his gut. Myra was pale but resolute. "We need to isolate sections of the ship," she said, voice steady despite her pallor. "Contain whoever's affected." Jace nodded, barking orders at Kael and Lyra, who snapped into action. Red alerts blazed across consoles, sealing off decks one by one. But it wasn't enough. Chaos echoed through the Relentless like a cacophony of shattered glass. Over comms, panicked shouts mingled with screams. Jace heard the distant thud of bodies hitting bulkheads, the whine of emergency seals activating too late. And all the while, the whisper persisted, insidious and relentless. "Come to me," it sang, luring them towards coordinates only it knew, towards destruction. Jace fought it tooth and nail, clamping down on his thoughts, focusing on the here and now, on saving his crew. But Myra, she was different. She was the Aeon's prime target. He could see it in her struggle. She stood rooted to the spot, hands clenching and unclenching at her sides, eyes glazed over. Her breath came in short gasps, and sweat beaded on her brow as she fought against the mental assault. "Myra," Jace called, voice gentle but firm. He approached her cautiously, as one might a skittish animal. "Stay with me." Her gaze flickered to him, recognition battling whatever hold the Ian had over her. "Jace," she whispered, voice raw, "it's strong." He reached out, taking her hand in his. Her skin was icy clammy. He squeezed gently, grounding her. "You're stronger," he insisted. But even as he said it, doubt gnawed at him. How long could they hold out against this? How long before they too succumbed? A sudden commotion at the bridge entrance drew their attention. Two officers dragged a thrashing figure between them, a fellow crewman, eyes wild and foaming at the mouth. "We found him in engineering," one of the officers grunted. "Tried to override the reactor controls." Jace's stomach dropped. He exchanged a glance with Myra, seeing his own fear mirrored back at him. "We're losing control." He turned to Kael, who looked as grim as he felt. "Lock down engineering," Jace ordered, "and medbay, prepare for casualties." Kael nodded, relaying orders through comms. Myra pulled away from Jace, taking a deep breath. She squared her shoulders, steel in her gaze. "I can help," she said resolutely. "If we can't shut it down, I might be able to redirect it." Jace hesitated, then nodded. "Do what you need to." She hurried off the bridge, leaving Jace with a sinking feeling. He trusted Myra implicitly, but this was uncharted territory. What if she couldn't resist? What if? He cut off the thought, focusing on the immediate crisis. More reports flooded in, fights breaking out, systems being sabotaged, crew members turning on each other or themselves. The Relentless groaned under the strain, her once smooth hum replaced by a symphony of alarms and emergency protocols. Jace barked orders nonstop, trying to stem the tide of madness threatening to engulf them all. Then Myra's voice crackled over comms, strained but determined. "Jace, I'm in my lab. I think I can build something to counteract it." Relief flooded him. "Do it," he urged. "We need you, Myra. Don't let it take you." A pause, then a soft, "I won't." The comms went silent. Minutes ticked by like hours. Jace coordinated damage control, his voice hoarse from shouting orders. Beside him, Kael worked silently, eyes never leaving the chaos unfolding across screens. Finally, Myra's voice came back online, breathless but triumphant. "I've got something," she said, "but I need to test it." Jace hesitated briefly before making his decision. "Get to the medbay," he instructed. "Lock yourself in. We'll bring you whoever we can save." Her pause was almost imperceptible. "Understood," she replied and signed off. Jace turned to Kael, who nodded grimly. They both knew what this meant. Myra might be their last hope, but locking her away could also mean isolating the most powerful weapon they had against the Ian's influence. Minutes later, Jace stood outside the medbay, Myra safely inside. He watched through the reinforced glass as she began working on a small device, fingers steady despite everything. A movement caught his eye, a crew member stumbling down the corridor, eyes glazed. Jace tensed, but Kael was faster, intercepting the man before he could reach the medbay. The commander stepped forward, hand outstretched in a placating gesture. "Easy," he murmured. But the man lunged, snarling, and Jace had no choice but to subdue him forcefully. As they dragged the unconscious body into the medbay, Myra looked up from her work, concern etched on her face. She met Jace's gaze through the glass, unspoken questions in her eyes. He gave a small nod, reassuring. But as he turned away, he felt a pang of guilt. "I'm sorry, Myra," he thought, "for everything." Back on the bridge, Kael looked up from his console, exhaustion carved into every line of his face. "We're losing them, Jace," he said softly. Jace nodded grimly, looking out at the chaos unfolding across screens. Then, with a resolve born of desperation, he turned to Kael and issued an order that sent a shudder through him. "Seal off the medbay," he commanded. "Nobody in or out without my say-so." Kael's eyes widened slightly before he nodded, understanding passing between them. They both knew what this meant. Myra was their best hope, but she was also the most vulnerable. And if she couldn't resist... Jace braced himself for her reaction as the medbay doors slid shut with an ominous finality. Through the glass, Myra looked up from her work, confusion turning to betrayal as realization dawned on her face. Her eyes met Jace's, and in that moment he saw not just fear but also hurt, deep and profound. But there was no time for regret. Not now when every second counted. So Jace held her gaze steadfastly, hoping she could see the truth behind his actions. He wasn't locking her away to punish or control her. He was doing it to protect her, to save them all. As the medbay doors sealed with a hiss of airlocks engaging, Jace felt something inside him harden. The whisper still echoed in his mind, but it was muted now, dulled by necessity and duty. He turned back to Kael, voice steady and resolved. "Status report," he commanded. Kael took a deep breath, rallying himself. Together they would face the storm that raged through their ship and their minds. Together they would fight for every soul aboard the Relentless. But as Jace stood on the bridge, surrounded by chaos and despair, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. He'd made his choice, to lock away Myra, to isolate her from the very crew she sought to save. And while part of him hoped it was enough, another whispered fears of what might come next. For in saving Myra, had Jace just forged an enemy where once stood an ally? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. The Ian's call had changed everything, and there was no turning back now. Chapter 6. Starlight and shadows, the observation deck was a sanctuary of quietude and cool recycled air. A stark contrast to the humming vitality of the rest of the starship. Commander Jace Krane stood by the reinforced glass, his reflection gazing back at him, a stern visage with a jagged scar bisecting his left cheek. The darkness of space stretched out before him, pinpricked with the distant fires of stars, each one a silent whisper of eternity. Dr. Myra Shen approached him from behind, her footsteps muffled by the deck's soft material. She stopped a respectful distance away, but close enough for their shoulders to nearly brush if either moved slightly. "It's beautiful out here," she said softly, her voice barely disturbing the stillness. "Like looking into the heart of forever." Jace nodded, his eyes not leaving the cosmic expanse. "Forever is a long time, Doc." He hesitated before continuing. "You saw something out there, didn't you? In that signal." Myra took a deep breath, the recycled air tasting faintly metallic against her lips. "Yes," she admitted. "The Ian signal. It showed me things. A universe without pain where consciousness is eternal, where everyone I've ever lost is still with me in some form." She paused, searching for the right words. It was like seeing a garden after a lifetime in a desert, lush and green and full of life. Jace turned to look at her then, his gaze intense but not unkind. "And what did this garden cost?" Myra met his eyes, hers reflecting the starlight beyond the glass. "Everything we are, our identities, our memories, our individuality. We become part of something greater, but we lose ourselves in the process." The commander's expression darkened, a shadow passing over his features. "Sounds like a fairy tale meant to lure children into a trap," he muttered. Myra shook her head gently. "It was more than that, Jace. It was beautiful, terrifyingly so. Like standing at the edge of an abyss and seeing all the stars below you calling your name." Jace looked away again, his fingers tracing the cool surface of the glass. "I get it," he said quietly. "The Ian promise is seductive. I saw it too." Myra's eyes widened slightly in surprise. "You did," he nodded, still not looking at her. "In my dreams sometimes, after the tin ambush, when I couldn't sleep because all I could see were their faces, my crew dead and drifting through vacuum." His voice caught raw emotion bleeding into his words. "I'd dream of a place where they weren't gone, where we were all together again, laughing and arguing like nothing had happened." Myra's heart ached for him. She knew the weight he carried, the burden of command, the ghosts of those lost under his watch. She reached out tentatively, her hand hovering near his shoulder before dropping back to her side. "Tell me about them," she urged softly. "Your crew." Jace hesitated, then began to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "Lieutenant Harris, always the first to volunteer for any crazy mission. Ensign Lee, who could hack into anything with a keyboard and a smirk. And Chief Engineer Voss." She had this laugh that could shake the bulkheads. His lips curved in a faint smile at the memory. "They were my family out there. We fought together, bled together." He fell silent for a moment before continuing, his voice heavy with regret. "I couldn't save them. The tin came out of nowhere, swarmed us. By the time we broke free, it was too late. I tried to recover their bodies, but space doesn't give up its dead easily." His fist clenched against the glass, knuckles white. Myra's eyes stung with unshed tears. She reached out again, this time letting her hand rest gently on his shoulder. He stiffened slightly under her touch, but didn't pull away. "Jace," she whispered, "you did everything you could." He turned to face her then, his eyes filled with a pain so deep it stole her breath. Did I just lead them to their graves?" Myra shook her head vehemently. No. You led them with honor and courage. That's what matters. Jace looked at her, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time beyond the title of doctor or scientist. He reached up, his rough fingertips brushing against hers where they rested on his shoulder. You believe that? She nodded, holding his gaze steadily. I do. They stood there for a long moment, hands intertwined on his shoulder, the universe stretching out before them in silent witness. The air between them shifted subtly, charged with an unspoken acknowledgement of shared pain and burgeoning connection. Jace's thumb traced circles on her hand, slow and deliberate. You know, he said quietly, when I first saw you I thought you were just another egghead from the lab, all brains and no heart. Myra raised an eyebrow, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. And now, he returned her smile, though his was tinged with sadness. Now I see someone who understands what it means to look into the abyss and not blink. His hand moved from hers to cup her cheek gently, his thumb brushing against her skin. Someone who sees past the scar to the man underneath. Myra leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. The observation deck seemed to shrink around them, the vastness of space beyond the glass fading into insignificance compared to the intimacy of this moment. She could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong beneath her palm, matching the rhythm of her own. You're not alone, Jace, she murmured. Not anymore. His breath hitched slightly at her words, and he leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers. The air between them was electric, a silent conversation passing unspoken. Myra's heart pounded in her chest, every fiber of her being attuned to him. Then, slowly, deliberately, Jace lifted his other hand, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw before cupping her face. His touch was tentative yet sure, asking without words for permission she gladly gave. She closed her eyes as he leaned in, their breaths mingling, and when his lips met hers, it was like a spark igniting in the darkness. The kiss was soft, gentle, a promise rather than a demand, a healing balm over old wounds. Myra's hands found their way to his chest, fingers splayed wide against the firm muscle beneath his uniform. She could feel the rise and fall of his breath, the steady beat of his heart echoing her own. When they finally pulled away, it was with reluctance born of years of guarded solitude. They stood there, foreheads pressed together, eyes closed, basking in the quietude that followed their first kiss. The observation deck seemed to hold its breath along with them, the stars outside unblinking witnesses to this tender moment. Myra's hand moved from his chest to his cheek, her fingertips tracing the jagged line of his scar. He leaned into her touch, eyes still closed, a soft sigh escaping his lips. She felt him every tension and fear, every hope and longing. And she knew he felt hers too. They were no longer just commander and doctor. They were two souls adrift in the cosmic sea, finding solace in each other's company. Neither spoke as they stood there, the silence between them rich with unspoken words and shared understanding. The universe stretched out before them, vast and indifferently beautiful, yet small compared to the bond now forged within this intimate sanctum of stars and shadows. For now, in this moment stolen from time itself, they were enough. And so they remained, wrapped in silence and starlight, two hearts beating as one against the vast, unyielding darkness beyond the glass. Chapter 7. Shattered reflections, the dim glow of the ancient archive footage cast eerie shadows across Commander Jace Krane's face as he sat alone in the secure viewing room. The air was thick with a silence broken only by the faint hum of the old Federation databases and the occasional static crackle from the vintage holographic projector. His eyes were fixed on the spectral images dancing before him, each frame a testament to a tragedy millennia old. The Krell warriors stood tall and proud, their forms etched with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and pulse with an inner light. Jace watched as individual Krell moved through what appeared to be a bustling cityscape, their faces alive with expression. Smiles, frowns, laughter caught midair. He saw one warrior, her skin the color of polished obsidian, laughing with another whose eyes held a warmth that seemed almost human. They had names etched into the digital records: Kayleys, Vexari, Lindor. Not just numbers or faceless soldiers, but beings with histories and dreams. Then came the transition. The camera angles shifted, panning over vast assemblies of Krell warriors standing in formation. Their chests rose and fell in unison as they chanted something ancient and resonant. The atmosphere grew heavier, charged with a palpable tension. And then it happened. One by one, the lights in their eyes flickered out like candles snuffed by an unseen hand. Jace leaned forward, his breath hitching as he witnessed the transformation. The same bodies remained, but the individuality was gone. Eyes that once sparkled with life now held only a void, reflective surfaces devoid of soul. Voices that had been rich and varied flattened into monotone drones, reciting words without emotion or understanding. He saw Kaylee's again, her face now a mask, moving mechanically through tasks she no longer chose for herself. Vexari stood rigid, his once vibrant eyes dulled to glassy orbs. Lindor, who had laughed so freely, now marched in lockstep with others, any trace of personality erased. Jace felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead as he watched the horrors unfold. This was what the Ian had done, to offer transcendence and deliver annihilation. The Federation's records were clear. The Krell had been absorbed into the Tin network, their individual selves swallowed whole by something vast and indifferent. The footage looped back to the beginning, but Jace couldn't bear to watch it again. He slammed his fist onto the controls, shutting off the projector with a sharp click. The room plunged into sudden darkness, punctuated only by the red emergency lights flickering along the floor. He needed Myra, not just as his colleague or ally, but as someone who had spoken directly with the Ian. If anyone could provide answers, or at least some measure of hope, it was her. Myra Shen looked up from her console when Jace entered the lab, her eyes reflecting the dance of data streams across multiple holographic screens. She smiled briefly before noticing his expression and stood abruptly, concern etching lines onto her usually serene face. "Jace, what is it?" He hesitated, unsure how to begin. "I found something in the archives." His voice was hoarse from disuse and emotion. "About the Krell." Her brow furrowed slightly, curiosity mixed with wariness. "What about them?" "You need to see this," he said, holding out a data chip. She took it hesitantly, her fingers brushing against his palm. Myra inserted the chip into her console, and within moments, fragments of the archive footage filled the air around them. Her eyes widened as she watched Kaylee's laugh, saw Vexari's warm gaze. Then came the transition, the chilling void replacing vitality. She looked away sharply, her face paling. "Turn it off," she whispered. Jace complied, and the images vanished. Myra turned to him, anger flashing in her eyes. "Where did you get this?" It was buried deep in Federation records. He stepped closer, his voice urgent. "Myra, they lied to us. The Ian didn't preserve individuality, they erased it." She shook her head vehemently. "No, they spoke to me, Jace, directly. They promised enhancement, not eradication." "They're not telling the truth," he insisted, desperation creeping into his tone. "Or maybe they can't. Maybe whatever controls them doesn't know how to communicate honestly." Myra's expression hardened. "You're projecting your fears onto this. You've always been scared of what we might become, of losing yourself in something bigger. But that's not what's happening here." He flinched as if struck. "This isn't about me," he growled. "It's about saving you from making the same mistake the Krell did." Her eyes narrowed and she jabbed a finger at him. "I'm not your mission to save, Jace. I make my own choices and I choose to trust the Ian." "You're being naive." His voice echoed through the lab, harsh and raw. "Naive," she scoffed. "You're the one clinging to old prejudices, afraid of change because it doesn't fit into your neat little soldier's worldview." Pain lanced through him at her words. He thought he was protecting her, but now all he saw was a chasm widening between them, filled with mistrust and accusations. "You think I want this?" He gestured wildly around the lab. "To see you destroyed by something that promises utopia? This isn't about me being afraid of change. It's about recognizing when we're being manipulated." Myra took a deep breath, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her eyes. "You're wrong, and until you see that, there's nothing more to say." Jace felt his resolve crumble under the weight of her conviction. He turned away, unable to bear the sight of her defiance. I can't do this," he muttered, heading for the door. "Jace, wait!" But he was already gone, leaving Myra standing alone amidst the humming machinery and flickering screens. The lab plunged into silence after his departure. Myra stared at the empty doorway for a long moment before sinking onto a nearby stool, her body trembling with suppressed emotion. She wrapped her arms around herself, hugging tightly against the cold seeping into her bones. Tears welled up behind her lids, blurring the data streams that continued to dance around her like indifferent ghosts. She blinked rapidly, trying to hold them back, but they spilled over anyway, tracing hot paths down her cheeks. What if Jace was right? What if she'd misunderstood everything? The Ian had spoken to her with such clarity, their voices resonating deep within her mind. They'd shown her vistas of transcendence, universes where individuality wasn't lost but elevated, to be part of something infinitely vast and interconnected. But what if that vision was a lie? She thought back to the Krell, faces she'd glimpsed only briefly in Jace's footage. Had they felt this same certainty, this conviction that they were choosing something extraordinary? Myra wiped at her tears angrily, smearing them across her cheek. She couldn't give in to doubt now, not when so much hung in the balance. The Ian had offered her a chance at something profound, and she couldn't let fear or uncertainty steal it away. Yet as she gazed around her lab, bathed in the cold glow of machinery, a part of her yearned for Jace's arms to wrap around her, offering comfort despite their disagreement. She missed him already, his strength, his unwavering belief in her. But more than anything, she missed knowing he stood beside her, unyielding. Her heart ached with the weight of choices made and paths untaken. Here she was, a brilliant scientist on the cusp of something monumental, yet feeling utterly adrift. The lab seemed colder now, the machines less like allies and more like silent witnesses to her internal struggle. She took several deep breaths, forcing herself back into focus. Doubt could wait. There were calculations to run, simulations to refine. The work wouldn't stop just because she felt lost. But as night settled over the lab, casting long shadows across every surface, Myra found herself alone among echoes of past conversations and memories of faces now hollowed out by time. A brilliant woman whose worldview was cracking under the pressure of truth and deception. And in that dark solitude, tears continued to fall, each one a silent testament to the battle raging within her soul, between faith and fear, hope and despair. Chapter 8, Ian's Echo. The FNS Relentless shuddered like a wounded beast, its decks groaning under the strain of cascading system failures. Alarms wailed in discordant harmony, painting the corridors with strobing red and yellow lights. Commander Jace Krane and Lieutenant Kael Vorn moved through the chaos with practiced precision, their boots pounding on grated metal floors as they sprinted towards engineering. "Portside thrusters are offline," Kael barked into his comm unit, voice steady despite the turmoil around them. Jace nodded, breath ragged but focused. "Reroute power from secondary life support. We can't keep this up much longer." Kael grunted in acknowledgement, fingers dancing over the control panel at his wrist. Sparks erupted from a nearby conduit, sizzling against the bulkhead like dying stars. Jace didn't flinch. He leapt over the hazard, trusty multi-tool already humming in his hand. "Engineering hatches jammed," Kael shouted, slamming his shoulder into the reinforced door. It budged but held fast. Jace joined him, and together they battered at it until it gave way with a screech of tortured metal. Inside, chaos reigned. Consoles sparked and smoked, and the air thrummed with the discordant hum of failing machinery. Kael dove straight for the primary power coupling, tools flashing as he worked to bypass the malfunctioning relays. Jace, meanwhile, zeroed in on the navigation core, its usually serene hum now a jarring cacophony of static and screeches. "Kael, we need those thrusters back online," Jace barked over the din. "I can't compensate for the drift without them." "I'm trying," Kael retorted, grimacing as he fought with a recalcitrant cable. "This thing's fighting me like it's possessed," Jace snorted. "Maybe it is. Feel free to exorcise it while you're at it." A sudden lurch threw both men off balance. The deck tilted sharply before compensating, but the damage was done. Kael's grip slipped, and his multi-tool clattered to the floor. "Damn it!" He lunged for it, fingers closing around the handle just as a deafening boom echoed through the ship. The lights flickered ominously, casting eerie shadows across their frantic forms. Jace paused, heart pounding. "Kael, that sounded like—" "The docking clamp," Kael finished grimly, eyes wide with realization. He surged to his feet and bolted for the door, Jace hot on his heels. They raced through smoky corridors, past panicked crew members huddled in alcoves, until they reached the emergency access hatch. It was a nightmare, metal twisted and scorched, bulkheads buckling under unimaginable pressure. Kael threw himself at the control panel, fingers flying over buttons as he tried to override the malfunction. "Come on, you bastard," he growled, sweat beading his forehead. "Open up." Jace watched the dials spin wildly before locking onto a catastrophic reading. His gut clenched. "Kael, it's no use." "No," Kael roared, slamming his fist against the panel. The hatch groaned but refused to yield. "Stand back," Jace ordered, drawing his plasma pistol. He fired into the seam, searing through layers of reinforced alloy until it glowed cherry red. With a final surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, he kicked out, sending the molten metal splintering inward. The force of the explosion sent them both sprawling backward. Jace's ears rang as he staggered up, coughing on acrid smoke. Kael lay crumpled against the bulkhead, unconscious but breathing. "Kael!" Jace dropped to his knees, checking for injuries. There was no time to waste. They were out of options and fast running out of luck. He hauled Kael upright, half dragging him back toward engineering. Every step felt like wading through treacle, each breath a labor against the thickening air. But he pressed on, fueled by desperation and sheer willpower alone. As they rounded a corner, Jace skidded to a halt. A figure stood silhouetted against the emergency lighting, Admiral Voss, his silver hair gleaming like a halo around his stern visage. The man's cold blue eyes bored into Jace with an intensity that sent shivers down his spine. "What the hell are you doing here?" Jace snarled, weapon rising instinctively. "You're supposed to be on the bridge." Voss stepped closer, unfazed by the pistol aimed at him. His voice, when it came, was eerily calm. "I'm exactly where I need to be, Commander." Jace's grip tightened on the gun. Something wasn't right. There was a wrongness in Voss' eyes, a serene certainty that bordered on madness. "You did this," he growled. "Why?" A faint smile played at the corners of Voss' mouth. "The transition has already begun, Jace. Can't you feel it? The Ian's presence ... It's like a second heartbeat in my mind. Beautiful." Jace recoiled inwardly, repulsed by the Admiral's words and the fervor behind them. He cut his comm to open channel with Myra. "Myra, can you hear me?" Static crackled before her voice responded, strained but steady. "I'm here, Jace. What's happening?" "Voss is involved," he whispered, keeping one eye on the Admiral. "He's changed." Myra went silent for a moment before replying softly, "Be careful, Jace." Then louder to Voss, "Admiral, if you're listening, I need access to auxiliary power grids. We can't hold out much longer without rerouting." Voss' gaze shifted towards the medbay's direction as if he could see through walls. His expression softened briefly before hardening again. "You think you can save this ship with your cleverness, Doctor? It's too late for that." Jace lunged forward, seizing Voss by the collar and slamming him against the bulkhead. The Admiral didn't resist, merely looked at Jace with those unsettling eyes. "You listen to me," Jace hissed. "I don't know what you've done or how deep this goes, but I swear on everything sacred, if one more person dies because of whatever sick game you're playing, I'll end you." Voss chuckled, a sound devoid of warmth or humor. "You can try, Commander, but the Ian doesn't fear death, it embraces it." With a violent shove, Jace released him and stepped back, breathing hard. He keyed his comm again. "Myra, do what you need to. We'll hold them off." "Understood," she replied, determination in her voice. Jace hauled Kael over his shoulder and staggered towards engineering once more. The ship groaned around them, every step fraught with peril. But they pushed on, driven by desperation and the faint hope that Myra could pull off another miracle. Back in the heart of Relentless, Myra worked frantically, fingers dancing across holographic interfaces as she wrestled with the ship's failing systems. Her confinement to medbay had never felt more confining, yet her mind raced freely through digital labyrinths, seeking a path to salvation. She tapped into secondary power relays, rerouting energy from non-essential systems to critical functions. Screens flickered before stabilizing, displaying cascades of data that only she could decipher. Sweat beaded her forehead as she delved deeper, bypassing corrupted protocols and reinstating damaged circuits with deft precision. Her hands moved almost independently, guided by instinct honed over years of study and practice. She was no longer merely a doctor. She was an architect navigating the digital blueprint of their vessel's life support systems. Come on, she murmured, teeth gritted as she fought against recalcitrant algorithms. Just a little further. A sudden surge of power jolted through her console, sending sparks flying. Myra gasped but held fast, eyes wide with exhilaration and fear. Then, slowly, the chaos began to subside. The alarms quieted, lights steadied, and the deck stabilized beneath her. She slumped back in relief, chest heaving as she stared at the restored displays. It wasn't much, barely enough to keep them alive, but it was something, a start. Jace, her voice echoed softly through the calm. I've got basic life support back online. Navigation's still iffy, but we should be able to limp along. His response crackled over the line, strained but relieved. You're a miracle worker, Myra. We'll take what we can get. Kael groaned behind him, regaining consciousness just as Jace dumped him unceremoniously onto an engineering console. The lieutenant blinked up at him groggily. What happened? He rasped. Jace clapped him on the shoulder. You took a header into a bulkhead, again. Kael grimaced but pushed himself upright, already reaching for his tools. And you let me sleep through it. Thanks a lot, buddy. Jace smirked despite the tension gnawing at him. Wouldn't want to deprive you of your beauty rest. Their banter faltered as reality intruded. The ship still groaned around them, and Admiral Voss' words echoed ominously in their minds. But for now, they clung to each other's dark humor like a lifeline amidst the storm. All right, Kael said finally, voice steady once more. Let's get this beast moving again. Together, they threw themselves back into the fray, repairing damaged consoles and rerouting power lines with grim determination. Each task completed felt like another step away from the abyss, but Jace knew better than to underestimate their foe. As hours passed into days, Relentless limped through hyperspace on emergency power alone. The crew moved cautiously amidst repaired systems, ever wary of fresh disasters lurking just beyond sight. Jace and Kael took turns at the helm, guiding their battered ship towards the Ket border, a sanctuary amidst unknown dangers. In Medbay, Myra continued her vigil over the wounded and weary, tending to both flesh and spirit with unwavering dedication. Her mind never rested, constantly scanning for signs of renewed sabotage or latent threats within their systems. The atmosphere aboard was thick with tension and suspicion, shadows lingering where trust once stood firm. Yet amidst the turmoil, bonds forged in fire held true. Jace and Kael stood steadfast beside Myra, united against the encroaching darkness. Admiral Voss, meanwhile, retreated to his quarters, cloaked in silence and secrecy. His presence hung heavy over them all, a specter of uncertainty casting long shadows through Relentless's corridors. But for now, they pressed on, comrades bound by duty and despair, sailing into the void with nothing but each other and fading hope. The Ket border loomed ahead like a beacon in the night, promising respite from immediate threats while raising new questions about alliances and loyalties. Whatever awaited them beyond that threshold, one thing remained clear. Relentless would face it together, or not at all. Chapter 9. Shadows of Ancient Wars. The bridge of the Relentless hummed with a tense silence, broken only by the occasional beep of consoles recovering from the battle's aftermath. Commander Jace Krane stood at the center, his hand resting on the grip of his sidearm, eyes fixed on the main view screen. The Ket warship loomed before them, a dark silhouette against the stars, its surface a forest of unfamiliar weaponry and sensors. The hatch to the bridge slid open with a hiss, and Lieutenant Kael Vorn entered, his face pale but determined. "Commander," he nodded curtly, taking his station at tactical. Jace gave him a grim acknowledgement, then turned back to the view screen as the airlock cycle completed, and a figure stepped onto the bridge. The Ket emissary was tall, towering over even Jace's imposing frame. His skin shimmered like emerald scales under the harsh bridge lights, and golden eyes with vertical slits for pupils regarded the humans with a cold, measured gaze. A jagged scar ran down his jawline, glistening slightly in the light, evidence of battles long past. His armor was dark and battered, adorned with a silver clan emblem that resembled a stylized claw. He carried no visible weapons, but the very air around him seemed charged with menace. Jace's grip on his sidearm tightened, and he could feel Kael's tension from across the bridge. Dr. Myra Shen, however, stepped forward, her curiosity piqued. She adjusted her glasses as she approached the emissary, her voice steady despite the tightness in her shoulders. "I'm Dr. Myra Shen, Federation xenobiologist." The emissary's gaze flickered to her briefly before returning to Jace. His voice was a low rasp, like stone grinding against metal. "Jace Krane, commander of this vessel." It wasn't a question, he already knew. Jace nodded once. "And you are?" "A emissary," the creature replied, "of the Ket." There was a pause before Jace asked, "What do your kind want with us?" The emissary's golden eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Your people have made contact with an ancient and dangerous entity, the Ian. We have been observing this interaction with growing alarm." Jace's brow furrowed. "You've been watching us?" "Aye," the emissary said, his gaze never wavering from Jace's face. "The Ket have fought the Tin for centuries. The Ian are connected to them." Kael shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Tin? What are they?" Myra stepped closer to the emissary, her scientific curiosity overcoming her initial apprehension. "The Tin, they're a species mentioned in some of the oldest Federation archives, thought to be extinct." Jace's gaze flicked to Myra, then back to the emissary. "And these, Ian, they're not what they seem?" The Ket's lips curved into something that might have been a smile on another being, but it held no warmth. "They do not elevate, they absorb." "Absorb?" Kael echoed, his voice barely above a whisper. The emissary turned to Kael, his gaze intense. "Your minds, your knowledge, your very essence. The Ian feed on sentient beings, Lieutenant." Jace's grip tightened further on his sidearm. "And what do the Ket want in exchange for this information?" The emissary's golden eyes flickered back to Jace. "Survival is not a transaction, Commander, but I offer more than mere words. We have developed technology specifically designed to block the Ian's influence." Jace hesitated, his mind racing. The idea of accepting aid from an alien species with unknown motives sent a shiver down his spine. Yet, desperation clawed at him. The Relentless was crippled, and their options were dwindling. "Myra," Jace said softly, not taking his eyes off the emissary. "Your thoughts." She looked up from her datapad, where she'd been furiously scribbling notes. "It fits with some of the anomalies we've observed in Ian activity. If what he says is true, this could be a game changer." Jace nodded slowly, then turned back to the emissary. "What's the catch?" The Ket tilted his head slightly, a gesture that seemed almost bird-like. "There is no deception here, Commander. We offer you knowledge and tools to protect your people. In return, we ask for vigilance and cooperation." Jace's mind raced through the implications. Cooperation with an alien species could mean opening doors they'd never considered, but it also meant stepping into unknown territory riddled with potential traps. "And time?" Jace asked finally. "How much do we have?" The emissary's expression didn't change, but his voice held a note of urgency. "Days, not weeks." Jace took a deep breath and let it out slowly before making his decision. "All right," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "We accept your offer." Myra stepped closer to Jace, her eyes shining with excitement mixed with caution. "Can you show us how this technology works?" The emissary nodded and gestured towards one of the consoles. Kael moved aside reluctantly as the alien approached, his movements precise and controlled. The bridge crew watched in silence as the emissary interfaced with their systems using a device that looked like a small, intricate spider made of dark metal. Data flowed across the console screens, symbols and diagrams unlike anything they'd seen before. Myra leaned in, her eyes wide behind her glasses. "It's incredible," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. The emissary turned back to Jace after a few moments. "This device will create a telepathic barrier around your ship and crew. It should protect you from the Ian's influence long enough for you to devise a plan." Jace looked at Myra and Kael, who both nodded hesitantly. He returned his gaze to the emissary. "And if we need more information?" The Ket's expression remained impassive. "We will be monitoring your progress. Contact us through the device when needed." Jace hesitated for a moment before extending his hand towards the Ket, half expecting it to be ignored or misunderstood. To his surprise, the alien reached out with one of its scaled hands and grasped Jace's forearm in a firm grip. The scales were smooth yet firm under his fingers. "You have made the right choice, Commander," the emissary said softly before releasing him and stepping back towards the airlock. "The path ahead is fraught with danger, but together we stand a chance." With that, he turned and left the bridge, disappearing into the shadows of the Ket warship. Jace stood there for a moment, staring at the closed hatch. Then he shook himself out of his thoughts and turned to Myra and Kael. "All right, let's get this technology integrated and start planning our next move." Myra nodded enthusiastically, already diving back into her datapad. Kael looked less convinced but took his seat at tactical without protest. As they worked, the bridge hummed with a new kind of energy, a mix of determination and trepidation. The telepathic shield technology began to take shape on their screens, weaving complex patterns that pulsed with an otherworldly rhythm. Jace watched it all unfold, feeling both hopeful and apprehensive about what lay ahead. Hours passed as they meticulously integrated the Ket tech into the Relentless systems. Myra's expertise proved invaluable, her mind racing through countless scenarios and possibilities. Kael remained quieter but contributed steadily, his tactical acumen ensuring that every aspect was covered. Finally, with a collective sigh of relief, Myra stepped back from the console. "It's done," she announced, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet bridge. "The shield is active." Jace looked around at his crew, Myra's determined gaze, Kael's steady resolve, and felt a surge of pride. They had faced an alien threat and emerged with new allies and tools. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with dangers they could barely comprehend. But for now, they stood united against the shadows cast by ancient wars. The Relentless hummed softly under their feet, ready to face whatever came next. Jace took one last look at the viewscreen where the Ket warship still loomed before turning back to his crew. "Let's get this ship ready," he said firmly. "We've got work to do." Chapter 10. The silence of the shield, the bridge of the Relentless hummed with an undercurrent of tension that had been building for days. Commander Jace Krane stood at the helm, his eyes fixed on the holographic display flickering before him. The crystalline node, a gift from the Ket, floated in the center of the room, its facets glinting under the harsh artificial lights. The emissary, an enigmatic figure draped in iridescent robes, circled it with precise, almost mechanical movements. His fingers traced intricate patterns over the surface, calibrating the device with a detachment that bordered on disdain. Jace's gaze occasionally drifted to Dr. Myra Shen, who stood a few paces away, her eyes closed as if listening to something only she could hear. Her face was pale, and her hands trembled slightly at her sides. She had been struggling with the ionic whisper for days, the constant, insidious voice that echoed through her mind like a relentless tide. Lieutenant Kael Vorn leaned against the nearest console, his arms crossed over his chest. His expression was stoic, but Jace could see the faint lines of strain around his eyes. Kael had heard the call too, though he'd fought it with grim determination. The silence that followed the activation would be a relief for him, Jace knew. The emissary completed his final adjustments and stepped back from the node. His voice, flat and devoid of emotion, sliced through the bridge's quiet hum. "The device is calibrated. Activation sequence will commence in 30 seconds. Jace felt a prickle of unease at the base of his spine. He glanced at Myra, who had opened her eyes but seemed distant, lost in thought. 20 seconds, the emissary intoned. Myra's breath hitched, and Jace took an involuntary step towards her. 15, Kael straightened, his gaze shifting between the node and Myra. His posture was tense, ready for whatever might come. 10. Jace reached out a hand, but Myra didn't notice. She stood rigid as if braced against an invisible wind. 5. The air on the bridge seemed to thicken, charged with anticipation. 3, 2, 1. A sudden jolt of energy pulsed through the room. The crystalline node flashed with a blinding light, and then a dome of shimmering interference expanded from its center, engulfing the entire bridge. Jace's vision blurred momentarily, replaced by a cascade of colors, reds, blues, purples, that danced before his eyes. Everyone on the bridge reacted instantly, but in wildly different ways. Myra collapsed to her knees, her body convulsing as if struck by an unseen force. Her hands clawed at her temples, and she let out a raw, primal scream that cut through the psychic static like a knife. Jace was beside her in an instant, his arms wrapping around her shoulders to keep her from collapsing completely. She trembled violently against him, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Kael's reaction was more controlled but no less intense. He doubled over, one hand pressed against the console for support. His face contorted in a grimace of relief and pain. The silence that followed the psychic snap was almost deafening to him, a respite from the constant ionic whisper he'd been battling. The emissary showed no outward sign of discomfort. He stood upright, his gaze fixed on Myra with an analytical detachment. "The device works by generating psychic static," he explained clinically. "It blocks the Ian's call, preventing it from penetrating the shield." Jace ignored the Ket emissary, his focus solely on Myra. He lifted her into his arms, feeling her slight frame shake against him. Her eyes were wide and wild, filled with a terror that went beyond mere fear. She clawed at his uniform, seeking something solid to anchor herself. "Myra," Jace murmured softly, though he knew she couldn't hear him over the tumult in her mind. He carried her towards the medbay, his steps steady despite the chaos within him. The medbay doors slid open silently, revealing a sterile environment bathed in soft white light. Jace laid Myra gently on one of the biobeds, his fingers brushing back strands of sweat-soaked hair from her forehead. Her breathing was ragged, and her skin felt clammy to the touch. He activated the medical scanner, which hummed to life, projecting a holographic display above her. The emissary entered moments later, his presence a stark contrast to the warmth of Myra's trembling form. "Her vital signs are stable," he stated, scanning the readouts with an impassive gaze. "The psychic shock will pass in time." Jace glared at him, his voice tight with restraint. "She needs more than your clinical assessment." The emissary met his gaze coolly. "Human physiology is not my area of expertise. However, I can assure you that the shield is effective. The Ian's call has been blocked." Kael appeared in the doorway, still pale but composed. His eyes flicked to Myra, then back to Jace. "I heard it too," he admitted quietly. "The silence. It's a relief, but it feels wrong somehow." Jace nodded, understanding the conflicting emotions that swirled within his lieutenant. The silence was a blessing and a curse, relief from the constant torment, yet an unsettling void where the call had once been. Myra's trembling began to subside, though her eyes remained closed, her face etched with lines of pain. Jace held her hand, feeling the faint pulse under his thumb. The biobed hummed softly, its sensors monitoring every twitch and flicker of her vital signs. The emissary watched them for a moment longer before turning away. "I will monitor the shield from the bridge," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Ensure the device remains calibrated." Jace didn't bother to reply as the Ket left the medbay. His focus remained on Myra, whose breaths were growing steadier. He adjusted her blanket, tucking it around her shoulders. Kael approached cautiously, standing at the foot of the biobed. "She'll be okay," he said softly, his voice almost a question. Jace nodded, hoping his own doubts didn't show. "She's strong." Myra stirred, her eyelids fluttering open to reveal dark, haunted eyes. She looked up at Jace, confusion and fear mingling in her gaze. What happened?" "You collapsed," Jace said gently. He squeezed her hand, offering what comfort he could through touch alone. "The shield activated. The emissary warned it would be rough for those who'd been touched by the Ian." Myra's fingers tightened around his. She took a shaky breath, her gaze drifting to Kael before returning to Jace. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I can still feel it, somewhere far away." Jace leaned closer, listening intently. "It's like an echo," Myra continued, her voice trembling slightly. "A faint call that I can't quite hear, but it's there. The Ian are still out there, calling." Kael exchanged a glance with Jace, his expression grave. They both felt the weight of her words, the relief from immediate torment and the lingering dread of an unanswered summons. Jace brushed Myra's hair back again, his touch tender despite his inner turmoil. He nodded slowly, determined to keep her safe despite the unknowns ahead. "We'll deal with it," he promised, though he knew the path forward was fraught with uncertainty. Myra's grip on his hand eased slightly as she closed her eyes once more. She seemed to draw strength from his presence, finding solace in his steady support. Jace sat by her side, watching over her until her breaths deepened into a restful slumber. In the quiet of the medbay, Jace's mind raced with thoughts of the future. The Ket shield, Myra's resilience, and the echoing call that haunted them all. He knew they had gained temporary respite, but the battle against the Ian was far from over. For now, he would focus on keeping Myra safe, ensuring she found her way back to strength and clarity amidst the psychic storms. The medbay doors slid shut silently behind him as Kael stepped out into the corridor. The bridge hummed with a new kind of energy, a sense of guarded hope tempered by the knowledge that their fight was far from won. But for now, in the quiet of the medbay, Jace held Myra's hand, his presence a silent promise that they would face whatever came next together. Chapter 11. Stars and Shadows. The observation deck was a sanctuary of quietude and vastness, a dome of reinforced glass cradling the infinite expanse of the cosmos. Myra stood at the edge, her reflection gazing back at her from the dark surface, superimposed over the distant pinpricks of light that were galaxies untold light-years away. The hum of the ship's engines was a soft lullaby, barely audible against the silence of space. Jace found her there, arms crossed tightly around herself despite the warmth of the deck. He hesitated at the entrance, his reflection in the glass showing a man with shoulders broadened by the weight of unseen burdens. His steps echoed softly as he approached, stopping a respectful distance away from her. "Myra," he began, his voice gruff but gentle, "it's late, you should be resting." She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "I couldn't sleep, too much, noise in my head." She gestured vaguely towards her temple. Jace nodded, understanding etched into the lines of his face. "The call," he kept his voice neutral, but there was a tension in his jaw that betrayed his concern. Myra looked back at the stars, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's always there now, like a song I can't turn off." She paused, then added with a touch of bitterness, "Or maybe it's more like an itch I can't scratch." Jace was silent for a moment before speaking. "I've seen others try to answer it," he said, his voice low and measured. "Good people, smart people, they thought they could control it, that the Ian would listen to reason, but it doesn't work like that." Myra's gaze sharpened as she looked at him. "You're talking about the others who have been exposed, the ones who—" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "Who went mad," Jace finished bluntly. "Or worse, lost in the echoes of something they thought was beautiful but turned out to be a nightmare." She shuddered slightly, hugging herself tighter. "That's what scares me," she admitted. "The unknown, the thought that I might lose myself in it." Her eyes met his, searching for something, reassurance maybe, understanding, and the thought that I might find myself changed forever by it. Jace shifted slightly, uncomfortable with the intensity of her gaze but unable to look away. "I won't lie to you, Myra," he said finally. "The Ian's call is a siren song. It promises understanding, power, whatever your heart desires, but it comes at a cost." He paused, his voice dropping even lower. "And I'm not going to watch you pay that price." Myra felt a lump form in her throat. She looked away from him, back out into the void of space. "You think I should stay behind the shield?" she stated softly. "It's safer," Jace agreed. "For now, at least," she laughed bitterly. "Safer, but at what cost? Forever cut off from whatever truth is out there." She gestured to the stars as if they held the answers he couldn't give her. "Isn't that a kind of madness, too?" Jace didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was raw and honest. "I can't tell you what's out there, Myra. I've seen glimpses, nightmares masquerading as dreams, but nothing concrete. But what I do know is what I see here." He stepped closer to her, his reflection merging with hers in the glass. "You, the woman who's brilliant and brave and more than anyone else I've ever known." Myra felt a flush rise to her cheeks at his words. She turned to face him fully, their gazes locking. There was something in his eyes, something open and vulnerable that made her heart ache. "I'm not just talking about your safety," Jace continued, his voice softening even more. "I'm talking about you, about us." He reached out tentatively, as if to touch her arm, but pulled back at the last moment. "Stay with me, Myra." She looked down, her fingers tracing patterns on the cool glass. "It's not that simple," she murmured. "The scientist in me wants to understand, needs to understand, and the woman is terrified." She looked up at him again, tears glistening in her eyes. "I'm terrified of what I might become without the call and terrified of what I might become if I answer it." Jace's expression softened further, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then stay who you are," he said simply. "Stay human. Stay with me." Myra felt a surge of emotion, love, fear, longing. It was all mixed up in a tangle inside her chest. She reached out, her hand finding his on the glass, their fingers intertwined, warm and solid against the cold surface. "I want to," she whispered. I want to stay with you, Jace, but I'm so scared. Jace's thumb brushed gently over her knuckles. I know, he said softly, but whatever happens, Myra, I'll be here. With you. They stood there for a long moment, their reflections side by side against the backdrop of the universe. Myra felt a strange sense of peace wash over her, despite the turmoil inside. She looked up at Jace, his scarred face rugged and familiar in the soft glow of starlight. Stay, he whispered again, his voice barely audible. Myra took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She thought of the call, the song that echoed through her mind, and the shield that stood between her and the unknown. And she thought of Jace, his strength, his stubbornness, his unwavering support. I'll stay, she said finally, her voice steady and sure. Jace's grip on her hand tightened slightly, but he didn't speak. He just looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of relief and tenderness that made her heart swell. Myra turned back to the stars, her gaze sweeping over the vast expanse before them. She felt a sense of resolve settle within her, a decision made not out of fear or desperation, but from a deep-seated need to hold onto what was real, what was true. I'll stay, she repeated softly, more to herself than to him. I'll stay human. And in that moment, amidst the silence and the stars, Myra knew she had chosen her path. It wouldn't be easy. The call would still whisper in the recesses of her mind, tempting and seductive. But she would face it with Jace by her side. Jace stayed quiet beside her, his presence a comforting anchor in the vastness of space. They stood there together, two small figures against the backdrop of the universe, bound by a choice made in the heart of the night. Myra felt a profound sense of contentment, of knowing that she had made the right decision. As they left the observation deck, Jace's hand found hers once more, his fingers warm and reassuring around her own. They walked back to their quarters together, the hum of the ship's engines a soft lullaby against the silence of space. In the quiet sanctum of her room, Myra prepared for sleep with a sense of calm she hadn't felt in days. Jace lingered by the door, his gaze lingering on hers with an intensity that made her heart flutter. He reached out, tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear, a tender gesture that belied the strength he exuded. "Good night, Myra," he said softly. She smiled at him, her eyes reflecting the soft glow from her room's lighting. "Good night, Jace." He hesitated for a moment longer before stepping back and closing the door behind him with a gentle click. Myra listened to his retreating footsteps, feeling a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature controls. As she lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, she couldn't help but think of the stars they'd left behind on the observation deck. The vast, unknowable expanse of space. But now, instead of fear or uncertainty, what filled her was a sense of connection. To Jace, to herself, and to the choices that shaped their paths. With a deep breath, she closed her eyes, letting sleep claim her as gently as a lullaby. For tonight, at least, she had chosen to stay human. And in that choice, she found a peace that transcended the stars above. Chapter 12. The void's embrace. The first screams pierced the comms like shards of glass. Commander Jace Krane's hand froze over the holographic controls on his command chair as the viewscreen flickered to life with scenes of chaos. The Pioneer's Pride, a colony transport bristling with hope and supplies, went dark in an instant. Lights blinking out like extinguished stars, engines sputtering into silence. Jace's heart pounded as he watched the bridge crew of the Pioneer's Pride collapse, one by one. A young ensign, barely out of training, crumpled to the deck, his hands clutching at empty air. The captain, a grizzled veteran with more scars than medals, fell from her chair, eyes wide in silent terror. The viewscreen split into multiple feeds, each revealing a different corner of Federation space. The stellar horizon, a research station orbiting a gas giant, went dark next. Scientists hunched over consoles jerked spasmodically before slumping forward. On the Nexus, a bustling commercial hub, passengers in transit froze mid-stride, their expressions turning from confusion to agony as they fell like marionettes with cut strings. Jace's voice cracked through the comms, raw and urgent. "All ships and stations within range of the beacon, report your status immediately." Static hissed back at him, punctuated by sporadic cries for help. His stomach clenched as he realized the futility of his orders. There was no time to respond. There were only screams and silence. Lieutenant Kael Vorn, usually a pillar of stoic efficiency, stood frozen beside Jace's chair, his face pale. "Commander," he whispered, we have thousands on those ships." Jace's grip tightened on the armrest until his knuckles turned white. "I know." He swallowed hard and barked into the comms, "All available medical teams to the docking bay. Prepare for emergency evacuations." The bridge erupted into controlled chaos. Officers rushed from station to station, voices a blend of urgency and fear. Jace could feel the panic threatening to consume him, but he pushed it down, focusing on the immediate tasks. Dr. Myra Shen burst onto the bridge, her eyes darting between screens and consoles, fingers flying over a handheld device. She had traded her lab coat for a tactical vest, her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her intensity was palpable. She was the only one who might stand a chance against this unseen enemy. "Myra," Jace called out, "what do you need?" She looked up briefly, her expression fierce. "Access to the Ket Tech and more time." The emissary materialized beside Myra as if summoned by her words. His eyes held an ancient, cold calm that sent a shiver down Jace's spine. "The Ian," the emissary said, his voice low and measured, "they do not negotiate. They exert pressure until minds break, until bodies fail." Myra nodded grimly, already immersed in her data stream. "I understand their methods. I've seen this before. We need to isolate the frequency of the beacon if we can disrupt it." The emissary's gaze shifted to Jace. "Your efforts are valiant, but futile if she cannot find a countermeasure." Jace felt a surge of anger at the Ket's detached tone. "We have lives out there, lives that need saving." The emissary merely regarded him with those unblinking eyes. "Lives that will be lost unless you act swiftly." Jace turned back to Myra, who was already deep in concentration. "Keep me updated," he ordered, and then addressed his crew. "All hands to emergency stations. We evacuate the survivors on our hulls now." The docking bay was a whirlwind of activity as medical teams rushed to the docked ships, their voices echoing with commands and reassurances. Jace watched from an observation deck above the chaos, his heart aching at each new wave of collapsing forms. Kael joined him, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Jace, there are too many." "Yes," Jace replied, voice hoarse. "And we can't save them all." He turned to Kael, gripping his shoulder. "But we will save who we can." On the bridge, Myra worked frantically, her fingers dancing over the Ket device. Data streams flickered across her face in holographic displays, casting eerie shadows on her focused expression. "Frequency isolated," she muttered, her voice barely audible above the din. "Now for the disruption sequence." The emissary watched silently, his presence an unnerving reminder of the eons they had faced and survived. On the view screen, Jace saw a glimmer of hope as a few figures on the Pioneer's Pride stirred weakly. Myra's efforts were bearing fruit, but it was too little, too late for most. "Jace," Kael called out from the comms, "we're getting reports of more ships going dark." Jace's jaw clenched. "Keep evacuating. We need to get them off those hulls before." His words were cut off as another transport, the Celestial Dawn, flickered out like a dying star. The screams that followed were muffled but no less chilling. Myra looked up from her device, eyes wide with a mixture of triumph and despair. "I've got it, but there's too much interference. We need to move closer to the beacon source." The emissary stepped forward. "Your vessel must approach the Eon's epicenter." Jace hesitated, weighing the risks against the potential rewards. "We can't leave Myra unguarded on that bridge," he said. Ket's voice was steady. "She will not be alone." Jace nodded, trusting in a cold certainty that seemed to radiate from the emissary. He turned back to his crew. "Myra stays here with the Ket Tech. All others prepare for an intercept course on the beacon." The bridge hummed with renewed urgency as officers adjusted trajectories and prepared for battle. Jace's heart pounded in his chest like a war drum. As they closed in on the beacon, the void seemed to darken further. The void stretched out before them, now teeming with spectral forms, silhouettes of people trapped in their transition states, frozen in agony. Each one was a stark reminder of what awaited them if they failed. Myra's voice crackled over the comms. "Jace, I'm detecting another surge. It's coming from deeper within." He gripped the armrest tighter. "Keep working on that frequency. We're almost there." The ship shuddered as it approached the beacon, a pulsating mass of dark energy visible through the view screen. Jace felt an icy tendril of fear creep up his spine. The emissary stood stoically beside him. "Your crew is brave," the Ket said, "but you must understand this might not be enough." Jace's expression hardened. "We'll do what we can and hope it's enough." He keyed the comms again. "Myra, where are we on that disruption sequence?" Her voice came back strained but determined. "Almost there. Just a few more calculations." Time seemed to stretch into eternity as they inched closer to the beacon. The ship's hull groaned under the pressure of unseen forces, and Jace could see the strain on his crew's faces. Suddenly, Myra's voice broke through the comms with an urgency that made his blood run cold. "Jace, we have a problem. Talk to me," he demanded. "I'm detecting multiple surges. It's like they're synchronizing their attacks. We can't disrupt them all at once." Jace felt a wave of helplessness crash over him. They had come so far only to hit this impassable barrier, but he refused to give in. "Myra, we need another way." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of consoles and the distant whispers of static on the comms. Myra's voice was barely a whisper when it came back. "Jace, I'm sorry." His heart sank. But then she added, "I think I know what to do. It's risky, but—" "Do it," Jace cut her off. Whatever plan she had, it was better than doing nothing. Myra didn't respond immediately. Instead, he heard the frantic tapping of keys and the hum of machinery as she worked furiously on the Ket tech. Jace turned to the emissary. "We're almost in range." The Ket nodded. "Then prepare for what comes next." Moments later, Myra's voice rang out clear and strong. "Jace, I've synchronized the disruption with the surges, but it won't hold long. We need to get everyone off those hulls now." Jace sprang into action, his orders barking through the bridge like thunder. "All hands, maximum evacuation effort. Get every living soul off those ships." The chaos intensified as crew members rushed to execute Jace's commands. He watched from the view screen as shuttle after shuttle launched, each carrying precious cargo, survivors wrenched from the brink of oblivion. But despite their efforts, it wasn't enough. The void was a graveyard of silent ships and frozen souls. Each second that ticked by brought new waves of transitioning forms, spreading like a plague across the starscape. Finally, Jace stood alone on the bridge, watching as the dead zone expanded before his eyes. Myra had managed to disrupt some of the surges, but it was too little too late for thousands who had already fallen prey. The view screen flickered with reports from stations and ships farther out, more colonies under attack, more lives hanging in the balance. Jace felt a deep-seated dread settle into his bones. The next wave would be worse. He knew it instinctively. He turned to the emissary who stood silently by Myra's side. "What now?" His voice was hoarse with exhaustion and despair. The Ket regarded him with an unreadable expression. "We prepare for war," he said simply. Jace nodded, his resolve hardening despite the crushing weight of failure. They had saved some, but the battle was far from over. As he looked out into the void, he knew one thing for certain. They would fight back no matter the cost. For now, Jace stood on the bridge alone, watching the dead zone spread like a cancer through the stars. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of his ship's engines and the ghostly whispers of lost souls in transition. He clenched his fists, steeling himself for the battles yet to come. The Aeon had made their move. Now it was time for humanity to strike back. Chapter 13. Shattered Loyalties. The Bridge of the Relentless was a maelstrom of controlled chaos. Commander Jace Krane stood at the center, his eyes scanning the tactical display that stretched across the main view screen. The silence of space was deceptive, broken only by the hum of consoles and the crisp commands of his crew. Outside, the void was alive with death. A ballet of destruction played out in the stark darkness, punctuated by the brilliant flashes of railgun fire and the eerie glow of plasma bursts. Admiral Voss's betrayal hung heavy in the air, a bitter taste that Jace couldn't shake. The battle group he commanded had turned on them without warning, their once friendly icons now glowing menacingly red on the tactical map. Jace could almost hear Kael's voice over comms, dry and steady despite the gravity of their situation. "Commander, we've got 3 bogies on our port side. They're painting us with targeting scanners," Lieutenant Kael Vorn reported from his tactical station, his fingers dancing over the controls with practiced ease. Jace's grip tightened on the armrest of his chair. Evasive maneuvers, Lieutenant Arana. Keep us moving. We can't let them get a clean shot. His voice was steady, but his heart pounded like a drum in his chest. The Relentless groaned as it banked sharply, engines straining to keep up with the abrupt change in course. The deck plates shuddered underfoot, and Jace steadied himself against the console. Railgun bolts streaked past their bow, missing by mere kilometers. The silence of space was broken only by the distant thrum of impacts on the hull, a grim reminder of the battle raging around them. "We're taking heavy fire from Voss's flagship," Kael reported, his voice tight but controlled. "Shields are holding at 80%. "Return fire, Lieutenant Vorn. Let's show them we're not going down without a fight," Jace ordered, his eyes never leaving the tactical display. The Relentless shuddered as its own railguns roared to life, spitting bolts of depleted uranium into the void. The bridge lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the faces of his crew. Alarms wailed and the acrid scent of ozone filled the air. Jace could taste fear, his own and that of his crew, but he pushed it down, focusing on the battle at hand. "Direct hit to port engines," Arana shouted from her station. "We're losing maneuverability." Jace's gaze snapped to the engineering display. Kael's voice crackled over comms, strained but resolute. "Commander, we've got a breach in Deck 7. Seal it off or we'll lose atmosphere." "We need those engines back online," Jace barked into his comm. "Lieutenant Vorn, reroute power from non-essential systems to the port drives." "Rerouting now," Kael replied, the hum of consoles filling the pause between their words. The Relentless lurched as another volley slammed into its starboard side. The scream of hull breaches echoed through the ship, a chorus of terror from the bowels of the vessel. Jace's heart hammered in his chest. He knew the cost of this battle would be high. "Commander, we've got multiple contacts closing on our stern," Kael warned. "They're trying to flank us." Jace's mind raced as he formulated a plan. "Lieutenant Arana, hard about. We need to break their line and buy some breathing room." He turned to his communications officer. "Open a channel to Voss's flagship. I want to speak with him." The viewscreen flickered to life, revealing the stern face of Admiral Voss. His eyes held a cold detachment that sent a shiver down Jace's spine. "Commander Krane," Voss began, his voice as smooth and unyielding as polished steel. "I'm disappointed in your resistance. You know you can't win this." Jace's jaw clenched. "And I thought better of you, Admiral. Your betrayal won't be forgotten." Voss' lips curled into a smirk. "History will judge me kindly, Krane. The Aeon are the future, and I intend to lead them." The comm channel crackled with static as Jace cut the transmission. He turned back to his crew, determination etched on his face. "We need to end this now. Lieutenant Vorn, lock onto their flagship and give me a solution." Kael's voice was grim but resolute over the comms. "Solutions locked, Commander. Ready when you are." Jace nodded, his gaze fixed on the tactical display. The Relentless shuddered again as it executed a daring maneuver, diving into a dense debris field to mask its approach. "Fire!" Jace commanded, and the ship's railguns roared once more. Bolts streaked through space, carving through the darkness toward Voss's flagship. Explosions bloomed on the enemy vessel's hull, but it held steady, shields glinting defiantly. "We did some damage," Kael reported, "but they're still in the fight." The Relentless shuddered violently as a volley of torpedoes slammed into its port side. The deck tilted sharply, and Jace grabbed hold of his chair to stay upright. Alarms blared, and the ship groaned under the strain. "Commander, we've taken critical damage to our engines," Kael shouted over comms. "I can't hold her together much longer." Jace's heart sank as he watched the engineering displays flicker and die. He knew what had to be done, what he wanted desperately not to do. Kael's voice was strained, but his resolve never wavered. "We need to fall back, Commander. We can't keep this up." Jace's hands tightened on the armrests as he made his agonizing decision. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to pursue Voss and end this treachery, but Kael's voice, steady and unyielding through the comms, was a lifeline. "No," Jace said softly, more to himself than anyone else. "Not without you." The Relentless lurched again as another impact rocked the ship. Jace barked orders, his voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. "Lieutenant Arana, plot an emergency jump. We need to get out of here now." "Jump plotted," Arana called back. Jace turned to his tactical officer, the weight of his decision settling heavily on his shoulders. Kael, can you reroute what's left of our power to the warp core? Over comms, Kael's voice was barely audible over the din of battle and failing systems. I'll try, but it won't be enough. Do it, Jace interrupted. We're jumping out of here. The ship groaned under the strain as Kael worked frantically to reroute power. The Relentless shuddered violently, engines screaming as they strained against the gravitational pull of the debris field. Jace, Kael's voice crackled over comms. I can't hold. A blinding flash filled the bridge view screen, the last remnant of power from Kael's efforts. The Relentless lurched violently as it was engulfed by the warp field, tearing free from the grasp of the debris and enemy fire. And then silence. The hum of engines faded to a whimper, and the ship drifted in the vast emptiness of space. Jace stared at the tactical display, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Voss's fleet was gone, vanished into the warp on their way to Ket space. Jace had lost, he knew that, but he also knew something far more important. Kael was alive. He turned from the view screen to face his bridge crew, their expressions a mix of relief and shock. Lieutenant Arana, Jace said softly, report our status. Arana's hands trembled as she worked her console, but her voice remained steady. We're adrift, Commander. Life support is critical but stable. Multiple hull breaches on decks 4 through 8. Jace nodded, his gaze fixed on the engineering readouts. The ship was a wreck, a miracle of metal and plasma that had held together long enough to escape. He turned his attention to Kael's station, now empty save for flickering lights. Commander, Arana whispered, Lieutenant Vorn. I know, Jace replied, cutting her off. His voice was strained with emotion, but there was steel in it too, a resolve forged from the crucible of battle and betrayal. Get medical down to engineering immediately. He strode through the bridge doors, his boots echoing on the deck as he made his way to sickbay. The Relentless groaned and shuddered around him, a dying beast clinging to life. Medical personnel hurried past him, faces grim but focused. Jace arrived at the medbay to find it in chaos. Injured crew members littered the decks, moaning under the harsh lights. Nurses rushed from one patient to another, their hands stained with blood and tears. Jace pushed through the throng until he found Kael's surgery pod. The transparent shell gleamed coldly under the fluorescent light, revealing a grim sight within. Kael lay motionless, his body a tapestry of injuries, shrapnel wounds, burns, and a deep laceration across his chest that bled even through the surgical field. Jace pressed his hand against the pod's cool surface, his reflection staring back at him like a ghost. Rage and grief burned in his chest, a fiery mix that threatened to consume him. Voss had won this battle, but he hadn't taken Kael from Jace, not yet. The surgery team worked feverishly around Kael's pod, their voices low and urgent. Jace watched as they stabilized his friend, their movements swift and sure despite the chaos surrounding them. Lieutenant Vorn will survive, one of the doctors said softly, turning to face him. But it won't be easy. He'll need extensive regenerative therapy. Jace nodded, his gaze never leaving Kael's still form. Do whatever you need, he replied. His voice was rough with emotion, but there was a resolve in it, a vow. As the medical team continued their work, Jace stood vigil over his friend, his mind racing. Voss had struck a blow that would shake the Federation to its core, but Jace refused to let this end here. He'd lost a battle, yes, but Kael was alive. And he knew one thing for certain, the war wasn't over yet. The medbay hummed around him, filled with life and hope in spite of the carnage outside. Jace stood tall, his gaze fixed on Kael's wounded form, as the weight of command settled back onto his shoulders. He would mourn the fallen, heal the broken, and rise again. This wasn't just about stopping Voss anymore. It was about protecting what mattered most, his crew, his ship, and the man fighting for life beneath the surgical field. Jace Krane had made his choice, and he would live with its consequences. The Relentless might be battered and broken, but its spirit endured. And so would Jace's resolve to see this through, no matter the cost. Chapter 14. Ashes of the Relentless, the chaos was a symphony of screams and clattering metal, a cacophony that echoed through the gutted corridors of the Relentless. Alarms wailed like banshees, their red strobes casting a hellish glow on the pandemonium unfolding within the mortally wounded vessel. In the heart of it all, Dr. Myra Shen stood like an island of calm amidst a stormy sea. Her voice cut through the bedlam with crystalline clarity, barking orders that brooked no argument. Section 3, seal off Deck 7. We need to buy time for the evac teams. She pointed at a huddle of survivors, their eyes wide with fear and desperation. You four help Lieutenant Vorn to the shuttle bay. Move, Commander Jace Krane watched her from across the chaos, all mingling with the grim resolve etched onto his face. Myra's calm intelligence was a beacon in the nightmarish scene, surprising even him. He turned back to the task at hand, covering their retreat as best he could. The boarding parties of Voss's forces swarmed through the Relentless like a plague of locusts, their dark silhouettes clashing against the stark white and gray of Federation uniforms. Jace moved with mechanical precision, his every muscle memory honed from years of combat. Yet each swing of his blaster rifle felt wrong, heavy with a burden he could not name. He rounded a corner, and there they were, Federation Marines, faces familiar yet twisted into snarls of hatred. Men he'd trained with, drank with, whose jokes still echoed in the corridors of his memory. Now they stood against him, weapons raised, eyes cold. The wrongness of it seared through him, but duty gnawed at his gut like a hungry beast. The first shot rang out, deafening in the confined space. Jace's aim was true. The Marine crumpled without a sound. The others hesitated for a fraction of a second, long enough for Jace to plunge into their midst. His blaster roared again and again, each bolt a thunderclap in his ears. He moved with a brutal efficiency born of desperation and years of combat. Kills that were necessary, devastating. A Marine lunged at him from the side. Jace pivoted, his elbow crashing into the man's face. Blood spurted, and the Marine staggered back, giving Jace the split second he needed to drive a knife through another's throat. The wrongness of it burned in every fiber of his being, but there was no time for guilt or remorse. He fought his way through the corridors, leaving a trail of bodies behind him. Each step felt like wading through quicksand, the weight of his actions pressing down on him. He reached an intersection and paused, catching his breath. The air was thick with ozone and the coppery tang of blood. He could hear Myra's voice echoing through the chaos, steady and sure. "Evacuation teams to the shuttles, move!" He pushed forward, driven by a primal need to protect what remained of his crew. The shuttle bay loomed ahead, its double doors sealed against the vacuum of space. A group of survivors huddled near the entrance, their eyes darting nervously between Jace and the approaching sounds of battle. "Jace," Myra's voice pierced through the noise, sharp with urgency. "Kael needs you." Lieutenant Kael Vorn lay sprawled on the deck, his uniform stained with blood. His breath came in ragged gasps, each one a labored struggle for life. Jace dropped to his knees beside him, his heart clenching at the sight of his friend's pallid face. "You shouldn't have come back," Kael rasped, his voice barely audible over the din of battle. Jace's reply was grim. "I couldn't leave you behind." With a grunt of effort, he hoisted Kael onto his shoulders in a fireman's carry. The weight nearly buckled his knees, but Jace gritted his teeth and stood, determination fueling his movements. Each step was agony, the muscles in his legs screaming in protest. The airlock loomed ahead, a gleaming barrier between them and the safety of the moon's surface. Myra stood beside it, her eyes meeting Jace's with a mixture of relief and fear. She hit the controls and the doors slid open with a hiss. "Hurry," she urged, stepping aside to let him pass. Jace stumbled into the airlock, Kael's limp form jostling against his back. The doors closed behind them, sealing them off from the chaos. For a moment, all was silent except for the hum of machinery and Kael's shallow breathing. Then the outer door opened, revealing the stark beauty of the moon's surface. The shuttle bay spilled out onto a barren landscape, devoid of life but teeming with danger. Jace stumbled forward, his breath ragged in his throat. The cold bite of the alien atmosphere stung his lungs, but he pressed on, driven by sheer willpower. The shuttles sat like metallic eggs against the rocky terrain, their engines humming softly. Myra and a handful of survivors rushed to meet him, helping Kael off Jace's shoulders with gentle hands. Jace staggered back, his vision swimming in exhaustion and pain. Myra steadied him, her voice soft but firm. "You did it, Jace," she murmured. "You got us out." He nodded, unable to find the words amidst the tumult of emotions churning within him. His gaze drifted back to the Relentless, its once proud form now a twisted wreck against the starlit sky. He knew what had to be done. Turning to Myra, he met her eyes with grim resolve. "I have to scuttle her." Myra's expression hardened, but she nodded. "We'll hold them off while you finish this." Jace staggered back towards the airlock, his steps heavy and leaden. He paused at the threshold, taking one last look at the survivors huddled around Kael. Their faces were etched with fear and determination, a mirror of his own turmoil. The airlock doors closed behind him, sealing him off once more from the world outside. He navigated through the corridors with a sense of finality, each step echoing in the silence. The ship's systems flickered and died around him, their lights casting eerie shadows on the walls. He reached the bridge, its once bustling consoles now dark and lifeless. Jace slumped into his chair, fingers dancing over the controls with practiced ease. He initiated the scuttling sequence, watching as the final countdown began. The Relentless groaned around him, her metal bones shuddering with the force of her impending demise. Jace took a deep breath and closed his eyes, letting the memories wash over him. Laughter in the mess hall, late-night strategy sessions, the camaraderie that had once bound them all together. The final explosion rocked the ship like an earthquake, sending shockwaves through its hull. Flames licked at the bulkheads, casting a hellish glow on the chaos within. Jace braced himself against the blast, his mind drifting back to the moon's surface and the survivors waiting there. He staggered out of the bridge, propelled by sheer force of will. The corridors were ablaze, the fire a living thing that clawed at his heels as he fled. He reached the airlock just as the ship began to tear itself apart, the sound a deafening roar that drowned out all thought. The outer door slid open with agonizing slowness, revealing the stark beauty of the moon's surface once more. Jace stumbled out, his body racked with pain and exhaustion. He fell to his knees, gasping for breath as he watched the Relentless die. The ship's destruction was a funeral pyre in space, a terrible, beautiful spectacle that lit up the night sky with fiery tendrils reaching toward the stars. The explosion sent shockwaves through the lunar surface, shaking the ground beneath him like an angry god's fury. Jace watched, mesmerized by the spectacle of his former home burning. When the last embers faded into the void, he looked up at the survivors standing around him. Their faces were upturned toward the sky, eyes reflecting the fading fire above. Myra knelt beside him, her hand on his shoulder, a solid anchor in the chaos. "You did it," she whispered again, her voice barely audible over the ringing in his ears. "It's over." Jace nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far more sinister. He rose to his feet with Myra's help, his gaze sweeping over the small group huddled together against the cold. "What now?" one of the survivors asked, her voice trembling. Myra looked at Jace, her eyes steady and resolute. "We survive," she said firmly, "one step at a time." Jace turned to face the horizon, his mind already racing with plans for their next move. The moon's surface stretched out before them, barren but not without hope. They had escaped the jaws of death, but they were far from safe. As the last flickers of the Relentless's demise vanished into the cosmic void, Jace took a deep breath and looked back at his crew. The cost had been high, too high, but they were alive, and that was enough for now. They stood there, silhouetted against the fading fire, a ragged band of survivors bound by loss and determination. Together, they would face whatever lay ahead, their eyes turned towards the stars and the promise of a future yet uncharted. Chapter 15, the holographic screens flickered to life across the dimly lit command center, casting eerie blue hues on Commander Jace Krane's haggard face. He stared at the news feeds, his eyes wide with a horror that gnawed at his core like acid. The images were relentless. They swarmed through Federation networks and broadcasted themselves onto every available surface. On one screen, the bustling streets of New Beijing were deserted except for lone figures drifting toward the Yellow Sea, their faces serene as if in a trance. Jace recognized Li Wei, the market vendor who had sold him steamed buns during his last visit. The old man was walking calmly into the waves, arms outstretched, oblivious to the frothing waters. On another screen, the skies over Paris were dotted with small, falling figures. People leaped from balconies of the Eiffel Tower observation deck, floating gently as if caught in an invisible updraft. Jace saw Marie Delacroix, the curator at the Louvre who had shown him the hidden chambers beneath the museum. She smiled beatifically as she ascended toward the clouds, her body limp but unconcerned. Jace's grip on his chair tightened until his knuckles turned white. The feeds were a kaleidoscope of devastation. Entire city blocks reduced to silent, echoing canyons, governments crumbling like sandcastles under relentless tides, families frozen mid-conversation at dinner tables, their eyes glazed over with the same peaceful emptiness. His mind flashed back to faces he'd known. A child he'd rescued from a burning building on Mars Colony 7, now standing motionless in front of a raging inferno. A diplomat whose fierce negotiations had saved countless lives during interstellar conflicts, now drifting weightlessly through the vacuum of space, her life pod tethered to nothing. The room echoed with the muffled sounds of his own breath, heavy and labored. Myra's voice cut through his daze like a knife. "Jace!" She stood beside him, her eyes reflecting the same chaos on her screens, but tempered by a fierce determination. He looked at her, trying to find words that wouldn't come. Instead, he gestured vaguely toward the feeds. "They're all gone," Myra nodded grimly. "I know, but we can't give up." Jace felt a pang of guilt. Myra had been working tirelessly for days while he was paralyzed by despair. Her lab was a war zone of scattered notes, half-empty coffee cups, and holographic schematics that danced erratically around them. She led him to her workspace, where stacks of data pads teetered precariously on every surface. A central display showed the complex structure of Ket technology, geometric patterns and mathematical equations that looked like alien hieroglyphs. "Look at this," Myra said, pointing to a section highlighted in pulsating red. "The beacon's frequency isn't random. It's a modulated signal designed to resonate with human neural pathways." Jace squinted, trying to make sense of the data. He saw waves and peaks, mathematical sequences that seemed to dance at the edge of comprehension. "The key," Myra continued, tracing her finger along the display, "is disruption. If we can introduce enough interference at the right frequency, we might break the connection." Jace looked at her, hope warring with skepticism. "And how do you propose we do that?" Myra gestured to another screen showing a map of major Federation worlds: Earth, Mars, Luna, Titan, and dozens more. Small blue dots pulsed at various locations. "Ket shielding nodes," she explained. "We activate them simultaneously across all these worlds." Jace's brow furrowed as he studied the map. "But the logistics. The Federation doesn't even exist anymore. Communication networks are down, governments have collapsed." Myra nodded, her expression somber but resolute. "I know it's impossible. But if we don't try, if we just stand here and watch this happen, we're no better than the Eons." Jace walked back to the news feeds, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts and images. He saw people he knew, faces from missions past, now forever etched in his memory as casualties of this silent apocalypse. His gaze fell on a feed showing a lone soldier standing guard at the ruins of a city, his rifle held loosely by his side, eyes fixed on nothing. "It's not just about us," Jace murmured, more to himself than Myra. "It's about them, everyone out there who can't fight this alone." Myra joined him, her voice steady but gentle. "We have to try something, Jace. We owe it to them." Jace felt a surge of determination. He turned to face her, his expression hardened by resolve. "You said simultaneous activation?" "Yes," Myra confirmed. "Then we need a way to coordinate that without relying on the Federation's infrastructure." Jace paced around the room, formulating a plan. "We'll have to use independent nodes, military outposts, private space stations, anything off-grid." Myra's eyes widened with understanding. "But those are scattered and unguarded." "Exactly," Jace interrupted. "We need volunteers, a small team that can infiltrate these locations and trigger the nodes manually." She nodded slowly. "It's risky. We'd be sending them into the heart of the chaos. We have no choice." Jace looked back at the feeds, his resolve unshaken. "If we don't stop this, there won't be anything left to fight for." Myra's gaze met his, and he saw a glint of admiration mixed with fear. She handed him a data pad containing her findings. "I'll gather everything you need, the coordinates, frequency settings, activation protocols." Jace took the device, feeling its weight as if it were a physical burden. He looked back at the screens one last time before turning away. "We have no backup plan," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. No fail-safes. We either succeed or billions more fall into the summoning. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Myra placed a hand on his shoulder. Then let's make sure we succeed. Jace nodded, taking a deep breath before heading toward the door. As he stepped out of Myra's lab and into the dimly lit corridors of the makeshift command center, he felt the weight of their mission settle around him like armor. The halls were eerily quiet except for the distant hum of emergency lighting and the occasional crackle of static from abandoned comm units. Jace walked briskly, his mind already sorting through potential volunteers, a mix of military personnel and Federation citizens known for their resilience and resourcefulness. He paused at a junction where several pathways branched off into different sections of the outpost. A holographic display flickered nearby, showing the latest updates from distant worlds. Cities falling silent, governments crumbling, and people drifting away into oblivion. Jace felt a pang in his chest but pushed forward. This was not the time for sentimentality. In one of the lower decks, he found Major Alara Voss coordinating a small group of survivors. Her eyes met his as he approached, her expression weary yet determined. "Commander," she acknowledged, standing at attention despite the circumstances. "We need volunteers," Jace stated without preamble. "A risky mission activating Ket nodes across multiple worlds simultaneously." Alara nodded. "I've seen what's happening out there. I'm in." Jace handed her a data pad. "This has all the details. Choose your team wisely. They'll need to be quick, smart, and ready for anything." As Alara began relaying orders to her team, Jace moved on to another section of the outpost where civilians were huddled together, sharing stories and comfort in tight-knit groups. He approached a cluster near an emergency medical station. Dr. Amina Patel sat among them, her medical kit open beside her. She looked up as he neared, recognition flashing across her face. "Commander Krane," she greeted softly. "We need medical support on this mission," Jace explained. "Are you willing to join?" Amina's gaze shifted briefly to the news feeds playing quietly in the background before returning to him with renewed resolve. "I'll do whatever it takes." Jace thanked her and continued, rallying more volunteers, engineers, pilots, even civilians with unique skills that might prove invaluable. By nightfall, a motley crew had assembled in one of the larger briefing rooms. The atmosphere was tense, but charged with purpose. Jace stood before them, holding Myra's data pad like a beacon of hope amidst despair. "We're going up against something unprecedented," he began, his voice steady despite the churning inside him. "The summoning has taken billions, friends, family, strangers, but we still have a chance to fight back." He outlined their plan. Infiltrate key locations across Federation space, activate Ket shielding nodes at precise intervals, and disrupt the beacon's frequency. "We've never faced something like this before," Jace admitted. "But if there's one thing I know about humanity, it's our resilience. We don't go down without a fight." The room hummed with murmured acknowledgments and nods of agreement. Myra stepped forward beside him, her eyes scanning the crowd. "We can do this," she said firmly. "Together." As the group dispersed to prepare for their missions, Jace lingered behind. He looked out at the stars through a narrow viewport, feeling both small and immense under their vast expanse. The cost of not trying was everything, and he refused to let that happen. Turning back toward Myra, he saw her watching him with quiet intensity. "We'll make it," she murmured, as if reading his thoughts. Jace nodded, clenching the data pad tightly in his hand. "We have no choice." Chapter 16. The call of the Ian, the humdrum of the ship's engines, was a dull roar beneath the clamor of angry voices echoing through the narrow corridors of the Aegis. Commander Jace Krane stood at the intersection of two main passageways, his boots planted firmly on the cold metal floor. The air was thick with tension and the acrid scent of sweat and fear. Behind him, Lieutenant Kael Vorn and Dr. Myra Shen flanked him, their expressions grim but resolute. The mutinous crew members, a motley assembly of engineers, scientists, and support staff, gathered in a chaotic semicircle, their faces etched with desperation and defiance. Among them was Lieutenant Lyra Taelize, her dark hair tousled and eyes ablaze with a fervor that bordered on madness. She had been one of Jace's most trusted officers, until the Ian's call had seeped into her psyche like poison. Jace, she called out, her voice cutting through the din. You know we can't keep fighting this. The summoning. It promises us more than just survival. Jace's grip tightened on the plasma rifle slung over his shoulder. He scanned the crowd, meeting their pleading gazes with a stoic calm that belied the storm within him. You want to join them? He asked, keeping his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. You want to give up everything we've fought for? A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. One woman stepped forward, her eyes filled with tears. She was younger than most, her face gaunt and her uniform tattered. Jace recognized her as Ensign Alara Voss, a communications officer who had lost her daughter to a system-wide epidemic years ago. Commander, she began, her voice cracking. I've heard it too, the call. It promises me my daughter back. Can't you understand? I can't bear the thought of never seeing her again. Jace's heart clenched. He couldn't argue with grief. He had no words to offer against the raw, primal pain in Alara's voice. Silence stretched between them, heavy and oppressive. You want a miracle, Jace finally said, his tone softening despite himself. I wish I could give you one. Alara's lip trembled. Then let us go, let us join the Ian. What do we have left to lose? Jace glanced at Kael and Myra, who both nodded subtly in support. But Jace knew he couldn't give in. The summoning was a siren song, luring with promises it couldn't keep. No, he said firmly. I can't let you do that. Mutterings of dissent surged through the crowd, but before it could escalate into chaos, Jace raised his rifle and fired a warning shot at the ceiling. Sparks rained down and the clamor silenced abruptly. Listen to me, he barked. We're not giving up, we fight on. Lyra's expression hardened, her resolve unbroken. She took a step closer, her hands clenched into fists. You can't stop us all, Jace. We've made our choice. Jace held her gaze, his resolve unwavering. Then I'll do what needs to be done. The mutiny was tense and grounded in the desperation of those who had seen too much horror. Jace felt a pang of sympathy for each face he looked at, a mix of fear and longing that echoed within him. I know you're afraid, he said, his voice softer this time. I am too, but we can't give in to despair. Lyra scoffed. Despair. That's all we've known since the Ian came. The summoning offers us something more. At what cost? Jace countered. Have you thought about that? What happens if you join them and they don't keep their promises? Myra stepped forward, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the turmoil around them. The Ian aren't benevolent beings offering salvation, she explained. They're alien entities with their own agenda. We can't trust their promises. Ensign Voss's eyes flickered with doubt, but Lyra's resolve didn't waver. We have to try something different, she insisted. Jace nodded slowly. And we will, but not by giving ourselves over to them. We'll find another way. The tension hung thick in the air as Jace and his officers worked swiftly to contain the mutinous crew members. With a heavy heart, he confined them at gunpoint, each step feeling like a betrayal of trust but necessary for their survival. Once the immediate threat was neutralized, Jace retreated to his quarters. The door slid shut behind him with a soft hiss, sealing him off from the chaos outside. He leaned against the cool metal wall and let out a shuddering breath. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel the weight of his decisions, a burden that grew heavier each day. But tonight was different. Tonight, Jace needed to hear the call just once, just for a moment. He sat on the edge of his bunk, closing his eyes and letting his mind drift. The Ian's voice whispered through the void, a siren song that promised peace, solace, transcendence. It felt like warm water enveloping him, soothing every ache and fear. Jace could almost see it, a kaleidoscope of colors swirling in his consciousness, each hue more vibrant than the last. The call was sensual, seductive. It spoke to the deepest parts of him, offering a respite from the endless battle for survival. He felt a tingling sensation across his skin, as if every nerve ending was alight with energy. The promise of unity, of connection, it was intoxicating. The Ian's voice murmured sweet nothings in his ear, reassuring him that everything would be all right. Jace let himself drift deeper, losing track of time and space. It was a dance on the edge of oblivion where every sensation was heightened, every emotion amplified. He could almost taste the promise, the sweet nectar of transcendence. Then, with a jolt of willpower, he tore himself away. The abrupt severance left him gasping for breath, his body trembling from the effort. He opened his eyes to find tears streaming down his face, a mixture of longing and relief. That was too close. Jace stood up, shaking off the remnants of the Ian's call. He splashed cold water on his face, trying to clear his mind. The cost of rejecting that voice was tangible. It felt like a part of him had been wrenched away, leaving an aching void in its place. But he had chosen this path. He chose survival over transcendence, duty over temptation. He returned to the command deck, finding Myra already there, poring over holographic maps and schematics. She looked up as he entered, her eyes reflecting a mix of exhaustion and determination. "We need to plan," she said without preamble. "The Ian will attack again. We can't keep relying on the shields indefinitely." Jace nodded, pulling up a chair beside her. Together, they began to outline their desperate counterattack strategy. They studied the patterns of the Ian's movements, analyzing weaknesses and potential vulnerabilities. "This is our best chance," Myra murmured, tracing a line on the hologram. "If we can disrupt their communication network, we might be able to buy some time." Jace leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "We need more than just time. We need a way to fight back." Myra's gaze met his, steady and unyielding. "Then let's find it. We've come this far, we can't give up now." As they planned, the weight of their responsibilities pressed down on them like a physical force. But amidst the chaos and despair, there was a glimmer of hope, a belief that even in the face of the impossible, they could carve out a path to survival. Jace looked at Myra, her dedication a beacon in the darkness. He knew he couldn't do this alone, none of them could. Together they would fight against the Ian, against the call that beckoned them toward an uncertain future. The night was long and fraught with uncertainty, but as dawn broke over the desolate landscape outside the ship's viewports, Jace and Myra stood side by side, ready to face whatever came next. The cost of their decisions weighed heavily on their shoulders, but they carried it with a quiet resolve, leaders under impossible pressure, bound by duty and hope. And so, amidst the echoes of the Ian's call and the whispers of mutiny, Jace Krane planned his counterattack, a battle for survival against an enemy that promised transcendence at the cost of their souls. Chapter 17. The price of resonance. Myra Shen stared at the holographic schematic floating above her console, the lines and nodes pulsing with an otherworldly blue glow. Her eyes traced the complex web of frequencies, resonances intertwining like a cosmic dance. After days of relentless calculation and simulation, she had finally done it, unraveled the enigma of the Ian's beacon. She turned to Jace Krane, his reflection in her glasses showing a mirror image of her own exhausted yet exhilarated expression. "I've got it, Jace. The key is a cascading resonance. We hit the beacon with a frequency that forces it into overload. It's like shattering a crystal, one strike at the right spot and the whole structure collapses." Jace leaned in, his gaze intense as he studied the hologram. "And the Ket shielding? How does that fit in?" Myra nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "We need to coordinate the shields across every major human world simultaneously. It's like creating a symphony. Each shield emits a specific frequency at just the right time. Together, they amplify and direct the resonance pulse." Krane let out a low whistle. "Technically impossible without functioning infrastructure." "That's where we're wrong," Myra countered, her voice firm. "We can use the remnant networks, the emergency relays still operational in most cities. It'll be risky, but it's doable." Before Jace could respond, the Ket emissary materialized behind them, its form shimmering into visibility like smoke solidifying. Myra startled slightly, not yet accustomed to the alien's silent arrivals. "It is done," the emissary declared, voice resonating like a distant earthquake. "Your solution holds merit in theory." Myra felt a surge of triumph, but it was short-lived as the emissary continued. "However, there exists a factor you have not considered." Jace straightened, his expression wary. "What factor?" The emissary turned to face them fully, its eyes deep pools of starlight, regarding them with an inscrutable gaze. "The disruption of the beacon will trigger a psychic backlash. The Ian's influence is not merely a call. It is a current that flows through every mind in transition. To sever this connection abruptly, it would be akin to ripping out the roots of a tree while it still stands." Myra felt her stomach churn. "What does that mean?" "Millions," the emissary stated, its voice devoid of emotion. "Millions of minds shredded, lost in the psychic storm. The cost is high, too high for any moral compass to navigate lightly." Myra's triumph evaporated, replaced by a cold dread. She looked at Jace, seeing her own horror reflected in his eyes. Jace shook his head, as if trying to dislodge the grim image. "We need more data," he said, turning back to Myra. "If we can quantify the risk, maybe find a way to mitigate it." "No," Myra snapped, her voice echoing through the chamber. She took a deep breath, calming herself. "I mean, no. We can't just throw away lives like that." Jace nodded solemnly. "Myra's right, there must be another way." He looked back at the emissary. "You've hidden things from us before. Is there anything else we should know?" The alien regarded them for a moment, then inclined its head slightly. "There is another path, but it requires understanding the Ian's call more intimately." Jace exchanged a glance with Myra, then stepped forward. "I'll do it," he said firmly. Myra grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his sleeve. "Jace, no." He covered her hand with his own, squeezing gently. "It's all right, Myra. I need to know what we're up against." The emissary watched them silently before speaking again. "Very well, but understand this, the Ian's influence is not merely seductive, it is overwhelming. The human mind was never meant to withstand such a psychic onslaught." Jace nodded, his resolve unshaken. He walked towards the edge of the shielded area, where the barrier hummed softly with energy. Myra followed him, her heart pounding. "Jace," he turned to her, his eyes softening. "Trust me, Myra, I'll be fine." Then, before she could argue further, he stepped outside the protective field. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Jace's body went rigid, his back arching as if struck by an unseen force. His mouth opened in a silent scream, and Myra saw the raw terror etched on his face. 30 seconds felt like an eternity. Every muscle in Jace's body trembled with strain, veins standing out sharply against his skin. Then his expression shifted, from agony to awe. His eyes widened, pupils dilating as he seemed to gaze into some distant horizon. Myra watched helpless as Jace's face contorted in ecstasy. She could almost see the Ian's promise unspooling before him, a tapestry of lost loved ones, a life renewed, every dream fulfilled. She saw glimpses through his eyes. Ghosts from Jace's past, his crewmates, their laughter echoing through corridors long since abandoned. Earth as it once was, vibrant and alive. Faces she didn't recognize but knew belonged to people he cared for deeply. The Ian showed him a world where time had been rewound, where every sacrifice hadn't been in vain. But Myra also saw the lie beneath the allure. The edges of these visions blurred, like reflections on water disturbed by an unseen current. She saw Jace's dead crew morphing into faceless mimics, his lost life twisting into a labyrinth of false memories. 30 seconds passed, each tick of the clock echoing like a bomb blast in Myra's mind. Just as suddenly as it had begun, Jace's body convulsed violently. He stumbled back, crashing through the shield barrier and collapsing to the floor inside their sanctuary. Myra rushed to him, falling to her knees beside his shuddering form. "Jace," he looked up at her, eyes glazed but lucid enough for her to see the turmoil within them. "I saw everything," he whispered hoarsely. "Everything it promised." The emissary stood nearby, watching impassively. "A testament to its power," it said softly. Myra glared at the alien before turning back to Jace. She helped him sit up, holding his gaze steadfastly. "What did you see?" Jace took a shuddering breath, his voice barely above a whisper. "My crew, alive again, Earth, not destroyed." He closed his eyes briefly, as if trying to shake off the remnants of those visions. "But it wasn't real." Myra nodded grimly. "The Ian's lies are as seductive as its truth." Jace looked up at her, determination returning to his eyes. "We can't let that happen again," he said. "Not to anyone else." Myra felt a surge of pride and relief mingled with sorrow for the lives already lost. "No, we can't." She glanced back at the emissary. "Is there anything else you haven't told us? Anything we can use?" The alien considered them both before speaking. "There are ancient Ket texts that detail methods to mitigate psychic backlashes, but accessing them requires venturing into Ket territory." Jace pushed himself to his feet, steadying Myra as she rose with him. "We'll do it," he said resolutely. Myra nodded in agreement despite the dread gnawing at her insides. They couldn't give up now, not when they were so close and yet so far from a solution. The emissary inclined its head slightly, acknowledging their resolve. "Then prepare yourselves. The journey will not be easy." As the alien disappeared, Myra turned to Jace, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're no closer to stopping the summoning, are we?" Jace met her gaze, his expression grim but determined. "Not yet. But we're still fighting." He extended his hand towards her, and she took it, feeling the warmth of his grip like an anchor in the storm. Together, they stood at the precipice of uncertainty, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The weight of millions of lives hung heavy on their shoulders, but Myra knew one thing for sure: they would not falter. Not now, not ever. They were still fighting, a beacon of hope amidst the encroaching darkness. Chapter 18. Alliances of desperation. The sky above Earth's largest ocean split open like a wound, revealing the abyss beyond. Commander Jace Krane stood on the observation deck of the Unity station, his reflection stark against the panorama of deep space that suddenly yawned overhead. Dozens upon dozens of Ket warships emerged from Higgs jumps, angular and dark as sharks, their silhouettes stark against the swirling cosmos. The fleet was a vision both awe-inspiring and terrifying, a constellation of metallic predators descending into humanity's atmosphere. The first ship pierced the clouds, a monstrous form that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. More followed, each one a testament to an ancient and alien technology, their arrival a silent declaration of power. Jace's heart pounded against his ribcage as he stared at the invasion fleet that had come not with weapons blazing, but with an offer: the Ket emissary's ultimatum. The emissary stood beside him, his scarred face a landscape of time and conflict. His voice resonated like distant thunder. "Commander Krane, humanity stands on the precipice. The Aeon's beacons will consume your people unless we intervene." "And what is this intervention?" Jace asked, his tone as cold as the void outside. The emissary turned to face him, eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "Merging human consciousness with Ket consciousness through our ancient network, a temporary union to shield humanity during the counterattack." Jace's reaction was immediate and fierce. "No," the word echoed in the vast chamber, a declaration of defiance. The emissary's gaze did not waver. "You misunderstand. This is not an offer of subjugation, but of salvation." "Salvation at what cost?" Jace countered. "Humanity will not become part of your collective. We have fought too long and too hard to maintain our individuality." The emissary nodded slowly, as if acknowledging a worthy opponent. "Then you must find another way, Commander." Dr. Myra Shen entered the observation deck, her steps measured but urgent. She had been monitoring the developments from her lab, her mind a whirlwind of calculations and theories. Her arrival was like a breath of fresh air in the tense atmosphere. Jace turned to her, his expression softening slightly. "Myra, what do you think?" She looked at the Ket fleet, then back at Jace. "I have an alternative." Her voice was steady, her eyes focused. "We can use the telepathic blocking technology on a massive scale." Lieutenant Kael Vorn stepped forward, his curiosity piqued. "Explain." Myra nodded and began to lay out her plan, her fingers tracing invisible patterns in the air as she spoke. "The Aeon's beacon operates on a specific frequency that targets human consciousness during transition. We can force-feed static into this frequency, disrupting it without killing those in transition. It will be like shattering the signal." Jace listened intently, his brow furrowing as he absorbed her words. "But how do we ensure the static doesn't harm them?" Myra's expression grew serious. "We can't guarantee complete safety. There will be psychic feedback. Some people might not survive it. But this approach preserves human sovereignty and gives us a fighting chance." The emissary watched Myra closely, his gaze inscrutable. "This is a risky endeavor," he said finally. "But if it means sparing humanity from full assimilation, I am willing to consider it." Jace's resolve hardened as he followed Myra's logic. The idea of using the blocking technology on such a scale was daunting, but it offered a path forward that didn't compromise human identity. "If this works," Jace said, turning back to the emissary, "what resources can you provide? We'll need every advantage we can get." The Ket leader's lips twitched in what might have been a faint smile. "Our technology is at your disposal. The network we offer for assimilation can be repurposed to amplify and distribute the static signal. Our ships will act as relay points, ensuring maximum coverage." Kael interjected, his voice tinged with skepticism. "And what do you gain from this alliance?" The emissary's gaze shifted to Kael, his eyes narrowing slightly. Survival. The Ian is a threat to both our species. If humanity falls, the Ket will not be far behind. Myra nodded, her mind racing with the implications. We'll need to work quickly. Time is of the essence if we're going to shield people before the next wave hits. Jace looked at Myra and Kael, his expression grave. All right, let's do this. We have our plan. He turned back to the emissary, his voice firm but guarded. We'll need a direct link to your fleet. Every second counts. The Ket leader extended his scarred hand towards Jace. It was a gesture laden with symbolism, a fragile truce forged in desperation rather than trust. Jace hesitated for a moment before taking the emissary's hand. The grip was firm, the skin rough and cool to the touch. An alliance formed, not out of mutual respect or friendship, but from the raw necessity of survival. Myra watched the exchange with a mixture of relief and trepidation. She knew the road ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty, but it was a path they had chosen together. She turned to Kael, her voice barely above a whisper. We need to start integrating the blocking tech into our systems immediately. Kael nodded, his expression resolute. I'll coordinate with engineering. We'll need every available resource. As Jace and the emissary continued their discussion, Myra retreated to her lab. Her mind was already racing through the intricate details of implementation, calculating frequencies, designing amplifiers, and mapping out distribution networks. The task ahead was monumental, but she felt a surge of determination. Hours turned into days as humanity's best minds worked alongside Ket technicians, forging an unlikely alliance in the name of survival. Myra's lab became a hive of activity, filled with the hum of machines and the murmured conversations of scientists and engineers from both species. The atmosphere was tense, but charged with purpose, a sense of unity born out of shared desperation. In the heart of the Unity station, Jace watched as the Ket fleet maintained its position in the sky, a constant reminder of their new allies' presence. He knew this alliance was fraught with risks and uncertainties, but it was all they had. Humanity would not be assimilated into the Ket collective, but they would fight side by side against a common enemy. As Myra finalized her calculations, she stepped onto the observation deck once more to find Jace standing alone, his gaze fixed on the Ket ships. She approached him quietly, her voice soft as she spoke. We're ready. Jace turned to her, his eyes reflecting the distant stars beyond the glass. Then let's do this, he said, his voice steady and resolute. The Unity station hummed with energy as Myra's plan was put into motion. Signals pulsed outwards from the station, amplified and directed by Ket technology. The static interference surged through the ether, disrupting the Ian's beacon frequency in a relentless wave. Across the globe, people in transition felt the psychic feedback, the sharp, disorienting jolt that threatened to consume their minds. Some screamed out in agony, others collapsed, their bodies convulsing as they battled against the assault on their consciousness. Myra watched the reports come in from around the world, her heart aching with every casualty. How many? Jace asked, his voice barely audible over the comms. Myra's fingers trembled as she scanned the data. Too many, she whispered, her voice breaking. But it's working. Most of them are holding on. The battle raged on, a silent war waged in the minds of millions. Myra and Jace stood side by side, their resolve unwavering despite the mounting toll. As dawn broke over the horizon, the first reports of success began to filter through. The transitioning souls were stabilizing, the Ian's hold weakening under the barrage of static interference. Kael approached them, his face a mask of exhaustion but also triumph. We're doing it, he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. The feedback is dying down. Jace nodded, a grim smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Good work, everyone. His gaze shifted to Myra, and she saw the pride in his eyes. Myra looked back out at the Ket fleet, her mind weary but hopeful. The alliance had been forged in desperation, born of necessity rather than trust. But it was an alliance nonetheless, a testament to humanity's resilience and their unwavering fight for sovereignty. As they stood there, watching the first light of day break over a world that still hung in the balance, Myra knew one thing for certain. They had found a way forward, not without cost, but with courage and determination. And in that moment it was enough. Chapter 19. The sacrifice the bridge of the Vesper was bathed in a cold, sterile light that cast long shadows across the faces of the crew. Dr. Myra Shen stood at the center, her reflection in the reinforced glass of the airlock mirroring the steely resolve in her eyes. Commander Jace Krane loomed beside her, his expression a mix of urgency and despair. "We can't lose you, Myra," he pleaded, his voice raw with emotion. "There has to be another way." Myra looked at him, her gaze steady. "Jace, we've been over this. The payload needs to be delivered directly to the beacon. It's the only chance we have to disrupt their frequency across human space." "But it's a suicide mission," Jace insisted, his voice breaking. "You're asking me to let you walk into certain death." Myra smiled softly, her fingers brushing against the small device clipped to her belt. A disruption payload, no larger than a palm but containing enough psychic energy to shatter an entire galaxy's communication network. "I've been walking toward this since we first detected the signal," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Remember when I told you about my dreams? The whispers in the darkness calling me. It wasn't transcendence they were promising, Jace. It was choice." Jace's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" Myra turned to face him fully, her eyes searching his. "The Ian weren't trying to lure me into some higher existence. They wanted me to choose, to make the ultimate sacrifice. To show humanity that sometimes the greatest power lies not in strength or technology, but in the willingness to give everything for others." Jace's hands clenched into fists, knuckles white with strain. "But why you? Why does it have to be you?" "Because I'm the one who heard their call," Myra replied, "and because I can do this. No one else has the expertise or the connection to the psychic field that I do." Jace's eyes flashed with anger and fear. "You're not just a scientist, Myra. You're more than that. You're my friend, He hesitated, his voice catching. "My everything." Myra reached out, her hand cupping his cheek. The touch was gentle but firm, a silent reassurance. "And you're mine, Jace. But this is something I have to do, for all of us." Jace's gaze fell to the floor, defeat heavy in his shoulders. Myra could see the battle raging within him, the warrior in him screaming for her to stay while the commander understood the necessity. "Please don't ask me to stop you," he whispered. Myra shook her head. "I'm not asking, I'm telling." He looked up at her, tears glistening in his eyes. "Then let me come with you." "No," Myra's voice was firm. "You need to stay here and lead the counterattack. You're their best chance for survival once the shockwave hits." Jace's jaw tightened, but he nodded reluctantly. Myra turned back to the airlock, her fingers hovering over the controls. Jace moved quickly, standing between her and the door. He placed his hands on her shoulders, his grip tight enough to hurt but gentle enough to hold. "Don't do this," he begged. "I have to," she replied, her voice steady despite the tears welling in her eyes. "For humanity." Jace's grip slackened, and Myra slipped past him, activating the airlock sequence. The door hissed open, revealing the void beyond. The cold of space seeped into the bridge, biting at their skin. Myra stepped inside the airlock, turning to face Jace one last time. "Remember what we fought for," she said softly. "Remember our promise." Jace's eyes burned with unshed tears. "I will, always." The airlock door began to close, sealing Myra inside. She took a deep breath, her fingers finding the activation button on the disruption payload. As the outer door opened, revealing the vast expanse of space and the beacon looming ahead like a malevolent star, she pressed it. A burst of raw psychic energy exploded from the device, enveloping Myra in a blinding light. The shockwave rippled outward, a visible distortion in the fabric of reality. It tore through the Ian's psychic field with the force of a supernova, shattering their frequency across all of human space. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The Vesper, Jace watching in horror through the reinforced glass, and Myra herself, suspended in the heart of the storm. Then chaos erupted. The beacon responded with a ferocious counterattack, its psychic energy lashing out like a whiplash. The shockwave struck Myra's ship, tearing it apart as if it were made of paper. Metal screamed and twisted, and the airlock door buckled under the force. Myra felt the impact like a physical blow, her body convulsing from the psychic backlash. She tried to scream but found no air in her lungs. Darkness claimed her vision, leaving only the echo of Jace's voice in her mind, a desperate plea that faded into silence. On the bridge, Jace watched in agony as Myra's ship disintegrated around her. The shockwave hit the Vesper, sending alarms blaring and consoles sparking. He stumbled back, clutching his head as the psychic ripple washed over him, a brutal echo of what Myra must have experienced. The crew scrambled to stabilize the vessel, but Jace could barely focus on anything beyond the airlock. Myra's lifeless body drifted in the void, her form twisted and broken. Panic surged through him, and he lunged for the emergency controls, activating the quarantine protocols. The bridge sealed off, isolating them from the rest of the ship as a precaution against psychic contamination. Jace rushed to the airlock, his heart pounding wildly. He entered the quarantine chamber, stepping over shattered panels and debris. The outer door was still open, exposing him to the vacuum of space. Myra floated just beyond it, her body limp and unnaturally still. Jace reached out, grabbing her wrist as if that simple contact could bring her back. With a grunt, he pulled her inside, the door cycling shut behind them. He cradled her in his arms, pressing his fingers to her neck, searching for a pulse. There was nothing, just cold, lifeless flesh and the fading echo of the psychic storm. "No," Jace whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of emergency systems. "No." He laid Myra on the floor, his hands hovering over her chest. He remembered the basic resuscitation training from his military days and started compressions, pumping her heart as if he could will life back into her body. "Come on, Myra," he urged through gritted teeth. "Don't you dare give up." Minutes stretched into an eternity. Sweat beaded on Jace's brow, mingling with the tears that streamed down his cheeks. He refused to stop, refusing to believe she was gone. Suddenly Myra's body spasmed, her back arching off the floor. A faint gasp escaped her lips and her eyes fluttered open, empty and unseeing. Jace froze, relief warring with fear. "Myra!" Her lips moved soundlessly, forming a word he couldn't hear. He leaned closer, his ear near her mouth. "Jace," she whispered, so softly it was almost imperceptible. He felt a surge of hope. "I'm here, I've got you." She blinked slowly, her gaze focusing on him. "It worked." Tears welled up in Jace's eyes again, blurring his vision. He nodded. "Yes, the shockwave disrupted their frequency. Billions are safe because of you." Myra tried to smile, but it was a weak mimicry of the vibrant woman he knew. Her hand lifted slightly, reaching for him. Jace took it, gripping it tightly. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I didn't want to leave you like this." "You're not leaving me," Jace said fiercely. "You're staying right here with me. We'll find a way to bring you back fully, I promise." Myra's eyes fluttered, closed again, her breath growing shallow. Jace held her close, rocking gently as if he could shield her from the darkness that threatened to consume her. The quarantine chamber hummed around them, a sterile cocoon of isolation. Jace pressed his lips to Myra's forehead, whispering promises and love against her skin. He would keep her safe until they found a way, until they defeated this enemy once and for all. As the ship groaned under the strain of battle, Jace held Myra Shen in his arms, his resolve unbreakable. Through the chaos and despair, there was one truth that shone like a beacon. She had made her choice, and he would honor it to the end. Chapter 20. The shattered interface the airlock hissed open, revealing the cold, sterile expanse of Admiral Voss's flagship, the Aeon's Embrace. Commander Jace Krane stepped through, magnetized boots clicking against the metallic deck. The ship hummed with an otherworldly energy, the vibrations resonating through his bones like a malignant heartbeat. He moved swiftly, weapon drawn, senses heightened by adrenaline and desperation. The corridors were dimly lit, shadows dancing at the edges of his vision. The ship felt abandoned yet alive, every panel and bulkhead throbbing with latent power. Jace followed the map etched into his mind, navigating labyrinthine passages designed to disorient intruders. But he was no ordinary intruder. He knew these ships had served on them. He could read their language of steel and circuitry. The maintenance corridor stretched out before him like a winding tunnel through the bowels of a leviathan. Zero-G with machinery spinning lazily around him, hulking, industrial forms that clanked and whirred in the silence. He propelled himself forward, hands brushing against cold metal as he used the walls to guide his path. Then Voss appeared, a specter materializing from the gloom. The Admiral was a grotesque fusion of man and machine. One side of his face remained human, gaunt, and pale, but the other was a latticework of circuits and biomechanical implants that pulsed with an eerie inner light. His movements were fluid yet jerky, as if he weren't fully inhabiting his body. He drifted in midair, arms outstretched like some macabre marionette controlled by unseen strings. Jace, Voss's voice echoed through the corridor, half human and half synthetic static. "You shouldn't have come." Jace gritted his teeth, gripping his weapon tighter. "And you shouldn't have betrayed everything we stood for." Voss tilted his head, a motion that seemed both curious and predatory. "Betrayal is a matter of perspective, Commander." They circled each other in the weightless void, machines whirling around them like planets orbiting a dark star. Jace lunged first, driving his blade towards Voss's torso. The Admiral moved with inhuman speed, twisting aside so that Jace's strike grazed his side instead. A hiss of escaping coolant filled the air as Voss's biomechanical components reacted to the intrusion. Pain should have slowed Voss down, but he barely flinched. Instead, he countered with a sweeping kick, sending Jace crashing into a nearby generator. The impact jarred every bone in his body. Sparks erupted from the damaged machinery, casting erratic shadows across the walls. Jace pushed off, launching himself back towards Voss. He fought with every ounce of strength and skill honed over years of combat. But Voss was no longer human enough to tire or bleed out. His movements were precise, calculated, almost detached. Jace landed a few glancing blows, each one feeling like it should have been fatal but barely registering on the Admiral. Then it hit him. Voss couldn't feel pain anymore. Or rather, what little he felt was secondary to his network presence. The realization shifted something inside Jace, forcing him to adapt his strategy mid-fight. He changed tactics, aiming not for flesh and blood, but for the network interface hardware embedded in Voss's body. Every punch, every slice of his blade targeted those glistening nodes and cables snaking under Voss's skin. Each hit elicited a different response from Voss, a flicker of confusion, a momentary stutter in his movements. Voss's eyes narrowed, the mechanical half glowing brighter with irritation. "You think you can defeat me by dismantling my extensions?" he sneered. "I am more than this flesh." Jace grinned savagely. "Then prove it." He redoubled his efforts, focusing on the interfaces. Voss tried to evade, but Jace was relentless, driven by desperation and a grim determination. He felt each hit resonate through him, the vibration of metal against metal echoing in his bones. A critical node at Voss's neck took the brunt of Jace's assault. The Admiral stumbled back, one hand clutching at the damaged interface as sparks flew from the wound. His movements grew sluggish, less coordinated. For a moment, Jace saw a flicker of the man he once respected, the mentor who had guided him through countless battles and strategic simulations. But that moment passed quickly. Voss snarled, lunging forward with renewed ferocity. Jace barely dodged in time, feeling the hot breath of death as Voss's biomechanical hand grazed his shoulder. The impact sent him spinning into a rotating turbine. He collided hard against its edge, pain exploding across his chest. He tumbled away, disoriented and bleeding. Voss loomed over him, face contorted in rage and something else, desperation. Jace knew he had one last chance. With a surge of adrenaline, he drove the blade upwards into Voss's torso, aiming for the heart but hitting an interface node instead. Voss froze, eyes wide with shock. The mechanical half of his face flickered wildly before stabilizing into a grotesque mask of calm. "You can't stop it," he rasped. "The Ian network, it's everywhere." Jace's breath came in ragged gasps. "Maybe not," he panted, "but I can stop you." He twisted the blade, severing crucial connections within Voss's biomechanical systems. The Admiral convulsed violently before going still, his body drifting lifelessly in zero-G. "Finally, I can hear them clearly now," Voss whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of machinery. Jace watched as the light faded from Voss's human eye, leaving only empty sockets staring into the void. A profound sadness washed over him, the loss of a mentor, a friend turned foe. This wasn't triumph, it was mourning, but there was no time for grief. Pain bloomed sharply in his side, spreading like wildfire through his body. He looked down to see a jagged piece of metal jutting from his abdomen, a remnant of the turbine collision. Dark blood pulsed around it, floating in crimson orbs amidst the weightless debris. He gripped the shard with trembling hands, wincing as he yanked it free. Agony lanced through him, blurring his vision. He knew he was dying, felt it in every labored breath and weakening pulse. But one thought burned brighter than the pain: Myra. With grim resolve, Jace began the arduous journey back through the ship. Each pull against the handrails sent waves of agony coursing through him, but he gritted his teeth and kept moving. The corridors blurred into a kaleidoscope of metal and shadows, yet he pushed onward, driven by sheer willpower. He reached the airlock leading to Myra's section, another locked door between life and death. His hands shook as he inputted the access codes, each keystroke a battle against encroaching darkness. The lock clicked open, revealing the familiar sight of Myra's lab, a sanctuary amidst the chaos. Myra looked up from her console, eyes widening in horror at the sight of him. She rushed forward, catching him before he collapsed entirely. Her hands were gentle yet firm as she eased him down to the deck. Jace, her voice trembled with fear and relief. What happened? He managed a weak smile. Got Voss, stopped his plan. Her gaze flicked to the wound, then back to his face. You need medical attention. No time, he interrupted, gripping her hand tightly. Need to see you one last time. Tears welled in her eyes. Don't talk like that, we'll find a way. Myra, his voice softened. It's okay. I've done what I had to do, but now I just want to be with you. She leaned down, pressing her forehead against his. Her tears mingled with his sweat, cooling the heat of battle. He closed his eyes, savoring the moment, her warmth, her presence. You're not alone, she whispered. Never alone. A faint smile touched his lips. In that moment, amidst the ruins of war and betrayal, there was peace. Then darkness claimed him, gentle as a lullaby sung by an angel. Chapter 21. The sacrifice and salvation. The medbay was a symphony of sterile silence, broken only by the rhythmic hum of Myra's stasis pod, and the ragged, labored breaths that Jace could no longer suppress. He dragged himself across the cold deck plating, his body a map of wounds, each one a testament to the battles he had fought and the love he had protected. The fluorescence of the overhead lights cast harsh shadows on his face, etched deep with pain and fatigue. Myra lay encapsulated in the Ket stasis pod, her form suspended in a gel-like substance that shimmered with an otherworldly luminescence. Her features were tranquil, unmarred by the turmoil of their recent ordeals. Jace reached out a trembling hand, pressing his fingertips against the cool glass of the pod. The gesture was futile, but it anchored him to reality, to the hope that he could still reach her. Jace, the voice echoed through the medbay, resonant and measured. The Ket emissary materialized at the doorway, its form a towering silhouette of metallic elegance. It moved with an efficiency born of centuries, perhaps millennia of existence. You are gravely injured. Jace turned his head to face the emissary, his gaze steady despite the haze of agony clouding his vision. I know, he rasped. His voice was a weak echo of its former strength, but there was an unyielding resolve in it. Can you help her? The emissary approached, its steps silent on the deck plating. It regarded Jace with an intensity that seemed to see through him, into the depths of his soul where love and duty intertwined. I can, it said, but there is a cost. Jace's breath hitched, not from pain this time, but from anticipation. He knew what was coming, had been braced for it since he crawled into the medbay. The emissary continued, its voice devoid of emotion, yet filled with an ancient wisdom. The Ket technology can draw Myra back from the Aeon's threshold, it explained. But in doing so, it will reset her neural pathways. Everything she has experienced, her memories, emotions, and connections to you will be erased. Jace closed his eyes, a single tear slipping down his cheek. The weight of the choice pressed down on him like a physical force. He thought of Myra's laughter, the feel of her hand in his, the way her eyes softened when she looked at him. All that would vanish into the void. He opened his eyes to meet the emissary's gaze. Can you save her? Yes, it replied simply. Then do it. Jace's voice was a whisper, barely audible even to himself. But there was no hesitation in it, no doubt. His choice was made, sealed with the finality of a death sentence. The emissary did not question him further. It moved to Myra's pod, its movements precise and efficient as it interfaced with the stasis unit. The hum of the machine intensified, becoming a low, pulsating drone that seemed to resonate within Jace's bones. He watched as lights flickered across the pod's surface, casting kaleidoscopic patterns on Myra's serene face. The Ket technology activated in clinical mechanical stages. The stasis gel began to dissipate, receding from Myra's body like a retreating tide. Her form was enveloped in a soft glow that pulsed in rhythm with the machine's hum. The emissary stood sentinel, its eyes glowing with an inner light as it monitored the process. Jace's vision blurred as he watched. His breath came in shallow gasps, each one more labored than the last. He knew his time was running out, but he couldn't tear his gaze away from Myra. This was his final act of protection, his ultimate sacrifice. She would live, even if it meant she would never remember him. The pod's glass panel began to retract with a soft hiss, revealing Myra's body, unmarked by the ordeal that had brought her here. The glow intensified around her, and Jace could see the delicate tendrils of energy weaving through her neural pathways, resetting them with surgical precision. He reached out, his fingers brushing against hers as they lay limp on the edge of the pod. Her skin was warm, alive, and he clutched at that small miracle. "Myra," he whispered, though he knew she couldn't hear him. "I love you." The emissary's voice cut through the haze, calm and measured. "Her vital signs are stabilizing. The process is complete." Jace felt a pang of grief so sharp it stole his breath. He looked down at their intertwined fingers, at the contrast between her unblemished hand and his own, battered and bloody. This was goodbye. With a surge of strength born from desperation, Jace pulled himself closer to the pod, leaning in until his forehead rested against hers. Her breath was soft against his cheek, a gentle reminder of life. "Forgive me," he murmured, "for everything." He felt her hand twitch in his grasp, but it was too late for her to respond. The Ket technology had done its work. Myra would wake up, but she would not remember the man who had given everything for her. The emissary watched him with an expressionless gaze, yet there was a sense of understanding there, a recognition of the sacrifice he made. "Your choice honors both your species and ours," it said softly. "Jace Krane, you have proven yourself a warrior worthy of respect." Jace managed a weak smile, his eyes never leaving Myra's face. "I just wanted to protect her," he whispered. The emissary nodded, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than agreement. It stepped back from the pod, its form fading into the shadows as it retreated to give Jace this final moment alone with Myra. Jace's vision swam, the edges darkening as his body began to shut down. He took one last, ragged breath, savoring the scent of Myra's hair, the warmth of her skin against his lips. Then, with a soft exhalation, he let go. His hand slipped from hers, falling limply to the deck. The hum of the stasis pod faded into the background, replaced by the steady beat of his own heart, slower now, weaker. He could feel the life draining out of him, but there was no regret in it, only a profound sense of peace. He had done what he set out to do, protect Myra, love her, and let her go. His last thought as darkness claimed him was a memory, a fleeting image of Myra's smile, bright and full of joy. It was enough. The medbay fell silent once more, the only movement the gentle rise and fall of Myra's chest. The Ket emissary stood watch over them both, its metallic form a guardian against the encroaching void. As Jace's heart stuttered to a final stop, it reached out with one of its articulated limbs, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. In that quiet moment, amidst the sterile confines of the medbay, two warriors from different worlds found common ground. A place where sacrifice met salvation, and love transcended even the boundaries of death. The emissary's gaze lingered on Jace for a moment longer before it turned to Myra, ready to guide her through whatever trials lay ahead. And so, in the quietude of the medbay, Commander Jace Krane made his final stand, a testament to love and duty that would echo through the corridors of time. Chapter 22. Echoes of absence. The hum of activity in the Federation's newly renovated xenolinguistics lab was a symphony to Dr. Myra Shen's ears. The air buzzed with the quiet efficiency of scientists bent over holographic data sets, their fingers dancing through ethereal interfaces as they deciphered the intricacies of Ket language and technology. Myra stood at the center of it all, her eyes scanning the complexities of a linguistic map that sprawled across the room like a galactic constellation. Her mind was sharp, her memories of scientific theories and discoveries as vivid as ever. She could recall the exact formulation of quantum flux equations and the nuances of interstellar politics with ease. Yet there were chasms in her memory, a vast emptiness where personal recollections should have been. She knew she had lost time, 6 months unaccounted for, but the void felt deeper than that. It was as if a part of her soul had been sealed away, leaving only echoes of a warmth she couldn't quite grasp. The lab doors hissed open and Lieutenant Kael Vorn stepped in. His uniform was pristine, but the lines etched into his face spoke volumes about the weight he carried. Myra glanced up from her work, offering him a polite smile. "Kael, what brings you here?" "Just checking in," he replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil she could sense beneath the surface. "How's the progress on the Ket translations?" Myra nodded towards the hologram. "We're making strides. The alliance with the Ket has given us unprecedented access to their technology. It's amazing what we can learn when we set aside our differences." Kael's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary before he turned his attention to the data. "It is. The Federation needs this partnership now more than ever." Myra couldn't help but feel a twinge of unease at his words, as if there was something unspoken hanging between them. She shook off the feeling and returned her focus to the task at hand. The new normal in the Federation was one of cautious optimism. The streets were cleaner, the air breathable again after the devastation wrought by the summoning. Public memorials dotted the landscape, honoring those lost and celebrating the unity forged from the ashes. Ket emissaries walked among Federation citizens, their ethereal forms a reminder of both the threat they once posed and the promise of future cooperation. Kael stood at the edge of one such memorial, a grand plaza adorned with towers of shimmering glass that reflected the setting sun. The names of the fallen were etched into the walls in glowing letters, a testament to their sacrifice and a stark reminder of what had been lost. Admiral Voss's name shone brightly among them, his betrayal still fresh in Kael's mind. The ceremony was somber yet hopeful. Council members delivered speeches about resilience and unity, while survivors shared stories of loss and redemption. Myra stood at the front, her posture straight and composed, her eyes distant as she listened to the tributes. "Dr. Shen," a council member whispered, approaching her with a gentle smile, "your work has been invaluable in these trying times. The Federation owes you a debt of gratitude." Myra returned the smile with grace. "It's my duty and honor to serve. The Ket have given us so much. It's only fitting we understand them better." As the ceremony drew to a close, people began to disperse, leaving small clusters around the memorial walls. Myra found herself drawn to one particular section, her feet moving almost of their own volition. She stopped before a name that seemed to resonate within her, a name she didn't recognize but felt inexplicably connected to. Jace Krane. The memorial was simple yet poignant, a sleek black plaque with his name etched in silver letters. Myra reached out, her fingers tracing the cool surface. An ache blossomed in her chest, raw and unfamiliar. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, confusing her further. "What do you know about him?" she asked Kael quietly when he stepped beside her. Kael hesitated, his gaze fixed on the name. "Jace, he was a hero, one of the many who fought to save us." Myra's voice caught in her throat. "I feel like there's more, like I should remember him." Kael's expression darkened with a mix of pain and guilt. "You did know him, Myra. Better than anyone else here." He paused, searching for the right words. "He was special to you?" Myra looked at him, startled. The ache in her chest deepened, a phantom echo of something profound. "Special. How?" Kael sighed, his voice barely above a whisper. "In ways I can't explain without hurting you further. You loved him, Myra, more than anything." Her breath hitched as she processed his words. Love was an abstract concept to her now, a feeling she couldn't recall experiencing or understanding. The void in her memory yawned wider, and she felt a pang of loss that was almost physical. "I don't remember," she murmured, her fingers still tracing Jace's name. "Why can't I remember?" Kael's hand gently covered hers on the plaque. "Because sometimes, Myra, remembering is more painful than forgetting." She looked into his eyes and saw the depth of his grief. It mirrored the emptiness within her, a silent testament to the cost of their survival. The plaza began to empty as night fell, leaving only the whispers of wind through the glass towers. Myra lingered by Jace's plaque, unable to tear herself away from the name that stirred such profound emotions in her. Kael stayed by her side, a silent guardian against the ghosts of their past. "Tell me about him," she whispered, needing to fill the void with something tangible. Kael took a deep breath and began to speak softly, his voice weaving a tale of bravery and sacrifice. Jace was part of the resistance. He fought against impossible odds, not just for the Federation, but for you. You two were inseparable. Myra listened intently, each word painting a picture in her mind. A man with fiery determination and unyielding courage. She felt a connection to this stranger, as if threads of their lives were intertwined beyond the reach of memory. "He gave everything," Kael continued, his voice choked with emotion. Including parts of himself that he never wanted to lose. Myra's gaze fell back on Jace's name. The ache in her chest was unbearable now, a physical wound that couldn't be healed by words or time. She reached out and touched the plaque again, feeling an inexplicable bond with the man she couldn't remember, but who had clearly left an indelible mark on her soul. "I wish I could remember," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Kael placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes, Myra, forgetting is a mercy. It allows us to move forward without being consumed by the past." She nodded slowly, accepting his words with a heavy heart. The weight of Kael's secret hung between them like an unspoken prayer, the burden he carried alone. As they stood there under the starlit sky, Myra felt a strange sense of peace. The ache remained, but it was tempered by a newfound understanding. She couldn't change what had happened, couldn't fill the void in her memory, but she could honor the love that still resonated within her, even if its source eluded her. With one last look at Jace's name, Myra turned away from the memorial wall, her steps lighter despite the sorrow etched on her face. Kael walked beside her, his presence a silent comfort amidst the echoing emptiness of their shared past. The Federation marched forward into a new era, built on the ashes of war and tempered by the sacrifices of its heroes. Myra Shen stood at the forefront of this journey, her brilliance a beacon guiding them through uncharted territories. Yet within her heart lay an unsolved riddle, an ache that whispered of love lost and found again in fragments too fleeting to grasp fully. As they walked away from the Memorial Plaza, the night enveloped them with its quiet promises. The stars above shone brightly, casting their celestial light on a world reborn, yet forever marked by the echoes of absence. Chapter 23. Echoes in the static, the laboratory hummed with the familiar symphony of machinery and the quiet whir of data streams flowing through ancient consoles. Dr. Myra Shen stood at a workstation, her fingers dancing over a holographic interface that projected a complex web of network pathways above it. The air was cool and sterile, yet comfortingly predictable. This place had become her sanctuary since Jace's disappearance, a silent companion in the absence of his presence. Lieutenant Kael Vorn entered the room, his footsteps echoing softly on the metal grating beneath him. He carried 2 steaming mugs, the aroma of bitter coffee wafting through the air. Myra glanced up briefly, offering a small smile before returning her attention to the hologram. "Thought you could use this," Kael said, placing one mug beside her elbow. "You've been at it for hours." Myra took the mug without looking away from the data streams. "Thanks, Kael. I think we're close to restoring another sector. The relays are responding better than expected." Kael leaned against a nearby console, sipping his own coffee. His eyes followed Myra's movements, noting the concentration lines etched into her forehead and the way her hands moved with practiced ease over the controls. There was a quiet strength in her, a resilience that had grown since Jace's disappearance. "It's amazing how much progress we've made," Kael said softly. "Jace would be proud." Myra paused briefly at the mention of Jace but didn't respond. Instead, she adjusted a few parameters on the hologram, her expression neutral. Kael watched her closely, seeing the subtle shift in her demeanor. He knew better than to push. Myra had her own ways of coping with the ghosts of their past. Later that evening, they found themselves in one of the station's few communal spaces, a small lounge area with worn-out couches and faded murals on the walls. The lights were dimmed, casting long shadows across the room. Kael handed Myra a thick, leather-bound journal, its cover weathered by time and use. "This was Jace's," he said gently. I found it tucked away in his quarters after everything happened. Myra took the journal hesitantly, her fingers tracing the embossed letters on the cover. His personal log? Kael nodded. He wrote in it often. I thought you might find some comfort in reading it, maybe even some answers. Myra opened the journal to a random page, her eyes scanning the neat handwriting. It was dense with technical jargon interspersed with occasional personal reflections. She read silently for a moment before looking up at Kael. This is ... intense, she murmured. He wrote about the challenges we faced, but also about his thoughts, his fears. Kael smiled sadly. Jace had a way of seeing things clearly, even when everything seemed chaotic. He saw potential where others saw only ruins. Myra flipped through more pages, each entry offering glimpses into Jace's mind, a mix of scientific observations and introspective musings. There were sketches of network diagrams alongside poems scrawled in the margins. She felt a strange tug at her heart, an unspoken familiarity with the words that shouldn't have been there. You should keep it, Kael said after a while. It might help you understand him better. Myra closed the journal and held it against her chest, feeling its weight. I don't know if I'm ready to understand him yet, but thank you, Kael, for trusting me with this. Kael reached out, gently squeezing her shoulder. You deserve to know, Myra. You were part of his life in a way no one else was. Over the next few days, Myra spent hours poring over Jace's log. Each page revealed layers of his personality she hadn't fully appreciated before. His determination, his humor, and his deep-seated compassion. She found herself laughing at his wry observations about their early struggles and tearing up at his hopes for a future they never got to see. One evening, as Myra sat in her quarters reading an entry detailing their first successful network restoration, she felt a profound sense of loss mixed with gratitude. Jace's words had a way of making her feel both closer to him and painfully distant. She traced the inked lines on the page, imagining his hand moving across the paper. Kael found her there, curled up in a chair, the journal open on her lap. He didn't speak immediately but watched her from the doorway until she looked up. Can I get you anything? He asked softly. Myra shook her head. No, I'm good. Just ... processing. Kael nodded and stepped closer, pulling out a chair to sit beside her. They sat in comfortable silence for a while before Kael spoke again. You know, Jace talked about you a lot, he said quietly. He admired your intellect, your dedication. He thought the world of you. Myra smiled faintly. I wish I could have known that part of him better. He didn't always express it well, Kael admitted. But his feelings were there, clear as day for those who knew him. Myra closed the journal and set it aside, her gaze distant. Sometimes I feel like I'm missing a piece of myself, like there's something crucial that I can't quite grasp. Kael leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. It's okay to not have all the answers, Myra. Life doesn't always give us clear-cut resolutions. Sometimes we just have to live with the fragments and trust that they mean something, even if we don't understand it yet. Myra looked at him then, gratitude shining in her eyes. You've been my anchor, Kael. Through all of this, you've kept me grounded. Kael smiled warmly. And you've given me a reason to keep moving forward. We're both healing, Myra, in our own ways. Myra reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. The gesture felt natural, comforting. They shared a moment of silent understanding, a bond forged through shared grief and mutual support. As the days turned into weeks, Myra's connection with Jace's log deepened. She found solace in his words, using them to navigate her own healing journey. Kael remained a steadfast presence, offering encouragement without intrusion. Their friendship blossomed organically, built on trust and shared memories. One afternoon, as they worked side by side in the laboratory, Myra paused mid-task and looked at Kael thoughtfully. You know, she began, I think I'm starting to see why Jace left his log with you. He knew you'd look out for me. Kael glanced up from his console, a soft smile on his lips. He had faith in both of us, and he was right to do so. Myra returned her attention to the holographic interface but kept talking softly. I've been thinking about what you said about living with the fragments. I think that's where I am now, accepting that some parts of my past will always be a mystery, and that's okay. Kael nodded slowly. It is. And those mysteries don't make your life any less meaningful. They're just part of who you are. Myra felt a sense of peace settle over her. The pieces of Jace's log, the memories they shared, and Kael's unyielding support had all contributed to this moment. She was whole again, even if part of her story remained unwritten. Later that evening, Myra found herself in front of a wall covered with holographic images, photos from their time working together on restoring communication networks. Among the technical diagrams and team photos stood out one particular image: Jace smiling at the camera, his cheek bearing a faint scar from an old injury. It was a snapshot of a moment long past but vivid in its detail. Myra reached out tentatively, her fingers hovering over the hologram before gently touching the scar on Jace's cheek. The gesture felt instinctive, almost automatic. She traced the line lightly, wondering why it seemed so familiar. A shiver ran down her spine as she pulled back slowly. Kael stood in the doorway, watching. He saw Myra's hand linger in midair and the distant look in her eyes. His heart ached with a mix of love and sorrow, love for her resilience and sorrow for the pain etched into every fiber of her being. He held on to that memory silently. A silent witness to her quiet grief and unspoken questions. He knew he couldn't provide answers to them all. But perhaps, in holding it close, he could help bear some of its weight. As Myra turned away from the hologram, she met Kael's gaze briefly before looking back at Jace's image once more. The expression on her face was serene, accepting. There were no tears this time. Instead, there was a quiet understanding that sometimes love means letting go without ever truly knowing why. Kael stepped closer, standing beside her as they both looked at the photograph. He didn't touch it or say anything, his silence an act of profound respect and grief. For in that moment, they were united not just by shared memories, but by a bond forged from the fragments left behind. A bond that transcended words and explanations. And so Myra stood there, whole yet incomplete, her heart echoing with the whispers of Jace's laughter and Kael's steady presence. The room filled with an unspoken promise, that even in the absence of answers, they would continue to move forward, side by side, carrying each other through the echoes of their shared past into an uncertain future. The chapter ended on a note of beautiful incompletion, the finality of loss tempered by the endless possibility of hope and new beginnings. Chapter 24. Dawn of the Alliance. The bridge of the Concordia hummed with a quiet energy, a symphony of advanced technology and the muted whispers of crew members going about their duties. The ship was a marvel, a testament to the alliance forged between humanity and the Ket. Its sleek dual-hulled design, one half gleaming with human innovation, the other adorned with the organic, bioluminescent patterns of Ket engineering, reflected the unity of its crew. Myra Shen stood at the forward view screen, her reflection ghosting over the vast expanse of space beyond. The sunrise on the new colony world was a spectacle unlike any other. The planet, dubbed Aurora Nova, was a swirling canvas of gold and crimson, as if the very heavens had spilled their hues across its atmosphere. Myra watched with a sense of awe and profound gratitude. Each ray of light breaking through the night's shroud felt like a gift, a stark reminder that dawns would come even after the darkest nights. Kael Vorn stood beside her, his presence a silent comfort. His eyes held a quiet sadness, a grief he carried with a stoic dignity. They had both been forever changed by the summoning, but Kael bore the weight of loss more visibly. Myra reached out and briefly touched his arm, feeling the tension beneath his uniform. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Myra murmured, her voice barely audible over the hum of the bridge. Kael nodded. "A new beginning." Myra turned to him, studying his profile. "Do you ever wonder if Jace would have liked this? The alliance, the ship, all of it?" Kael's expression softened slightly. "I think he would have been proud. He always believed in looking beyond our differences." His voice trailed off, but Myra could feel the unspoken words hanging in the air. The Ket emissary approached them, its movements fluid and graceful. The bioluminescent markings on its exoskeleton pulsed softly, casting an ethereal glow on the bridge's deck. The emissary had evolved from a figure of distrust to something closer to an ally, an evolution marked not by sudden shifts, but by incremental steps of mutual understanding. "Your kind has a way with words," the emissary said, its voice a melodic hum translated through their communicators. "The concept of pride is intriguing." Myra smiled gently. It's a feeling of satisfaction and honor for something significant we've accomplished or someone we care about. She glanced at Kael, then back to the emissary. I think you understand it better than you realize. The emissary tilted its head in what Myra interpreted as thoughtful contemplation. We have observed your resilience, Dr. Shen. Your capacity for hope despite adversity is remarkable. Kael nodded agreement. And our mutual losses, he added quietly. Myra watched the sunrise with renewed intensity, her thoughts drifting back to Jace and all they had sacrificed. The Aeon's signal still lingered out there, dormant yet ever-present, a silent promise of future peril. But for now, humanity was rebuilding, and the Ket stood beside them. The Concordia's crew buzzed with a mix of anticipation and solemnity as preparations continued for the ship's formal commissioning ceremony. Myra moved through the crowd, greeting familiar faces, human and Ket alike, and marveling at how seamlessly they worked together despite their differences. The bridge was alive with stories of lives intertwined by necessity and choice. The emissary stayed close to her side, observing the humans with an air of cautious respect. Your species is resilient, it said again, as if testing the words for accuracy. But also fragile, Myra nodded. We are. But we've learned from our fragility. We adapt and overcome. She thought of Jace, of all those lost during the summoning, sometimes at great cost. The emissary's bioluminescent markings pulsed thoughtfully. Costs that shape us, it agreed. Myra felt a pang of sadness but also pride as she watched Kael address the gathered crew. He spoke of unity, of sacrifice, and of the new dawn they faced together. His words were measured, yet they carried an emotional weight that resonated throughout the bridge. When he mentioned Jace among the honored dead, Myra's heart clenched. She listened intently, remembering every moment, his laughter, his determination, his unwavering belief in their mission. The sacrifice had been worth it, she told herself firmly. It had to be. The ceremony concluded with a collective murmur of approval and a sense of unity that transcended species boundaries. As the crew dispersed, Myra found herself once more at the viewscreen, gazing into the void beyond Aurora Nova. Kael joined her again, his presence a comforting anchor amidst the swirling emotions within her. The Aeon are out there, he said softly, following her gaze. But we're ready, Myra nodded. We've come so far since those first terrifying encounters. She reached out and took his hand, feeling the strength in his grip. And we'll go farther still. The emissary approached them once more, its presence a comforting reminder of their alliance. You are not alone, it said, echoing Myra's thoughts. Nor are you forgotten. The Ket stand with humanity. Myra looked at the emissary, gratitude welling up within her. Thank you. The bridge grew quieter as the day wore on, and Myra found herself drawn back to the viewscreen. The cosmic void stretched out before them, a canvas of stars and swirling galaxies, filled with both possibility and danger. It was a stark reminder that their journey was far from over. Yet there was hope in that vastness, hope born from unity, resilience, and shared purpose. Humanity had faced the unthinkable and emerged stronger, forged in the crucible of adversity. And as she stood there with Kael and the emissary, Myra felt a profound sense of peace mingled with anticipation. The Aeon were out there, their threat dormant but ever-present. Yet humanity was not alone. They had allies, friends, and a future to build together. The void between stars was no longer a terrifying abyss, but an expanse filled with potential, a challenge to be faced with courage and determination. As the final light of Aurora Nova's sunrise faded into the horizon, Myra took one last look at the cosmos before turning away from the viewscreen. She stood tall, her eyes reflecting the stars she had gazed upon, stars that now held not just fear but also promise. Beside her, Kael and the emissary shared a moment of silent understanding. Together, they walked off the bridge, leaving the Concordia's humming heart to carry them forward into the unknown. The void awaited, vast and unyielding, but humanity faced it with open hearts and steadfast resolve. The sacrifice had been made, the dawn had broken, and as long as there was light in the darkness, hope remained. End of the summoning. End of audiobook The Summoning. Narrated by, name of narrator, written by, Arthur F. Iceley, produced by, production company name, music by, composer's name, sound design by, sound designer's name, engineered by. Audio engineer's name, cover art by, artist's name. If you enjoyed this audiobook, please like and subscribe. Follow us on social media, Twitter, at Publisher's Handle, Facebook, Publisher's Page, Instagram, at Publisher's Handle.